2. Are you there? Hello, folks. Are you with me? Where my chatters at? Sound off in the comments. People are so not used to me showing up actually at a normal time. I totally suggested a few months ago that I would try to start what were my exact words? Noon at the latest, I think. Noon at the latest.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Really worked out,
a free Palestine within our lifetimes.
Jack, thanks for 20 months, tier 1. I agree. Never late. Oh, I've never seen that. You're at a 20 stream watch streak. I've never seen that before. Nee. We got Cinnamon Challenge as well. Look at me with my perfect attendance reward. We got a couple of watch streaks here. What is that? Never seen that. A new thing, I guess. Let's get this started properly. I gotta load of these nerds. I'm not gonna call them nerds. I shouldn't be calling my most devoted listeners and chatters nerds. In fact, Sam, where's your watch streak? That's what I want to know. Now when people show up and they don't have a watch streak, I want to know what's going on with that. Why is it only 2 chatters with a watch streak right now? What flavor is that? Is Ultra Paradise. Kind of like a pineapple, sort of a pineapple tropical thing. Chin chin. My dog ate my watch streak. A likely story. A likely story. Hello, Carrier Wave. How's it going? It snowed a lot. It snowed a lot last night here in Montreal. It was like a full-on, like, I don't know if I would call it a blizzard, but it really snowed heavily all night. And definitely a couple. I'm just looking out on my balcony. I could definitely at least a couple inches. 5 inches of snow or whatever. Maybe a bit more. I don't know. It was a lot. It was a lot. And I woke up this morning to my power going out, because now I guess we can't have, like, if it's an ice storm, if it rains a lot, if it snows a lot, if it's windy, we just lose electricity here now.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
ACAB includes doctors.
Hello, gay Jame. Thanks for 17 months. I agree. What are doctors more than just like cops for your body? You know? Oh, stop smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. Stop drinking beer all the time. Stop eating red meat. Stop doing this. Stop doing that. Whoa, it's like what? Or what? Or else what? What are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? Why are you telling me how to live? What, are you going to send me to body jail?
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
TRRS Sankara.
Thank you, Weird Luck, for the 8 months. I appreciate it. They are cop adjacent, it's true. I don't want to paint all doctors with that brush, but it seems a lot of them have that kind of mentality. Everyone sharing their watch streaks in the community, in the chat. Everyone sharing their watch streaks, that Twitch feature that we all love. That Twitch feature that everyone is familiar with. I have a doc appointment in 3 hours now. I'm going to be giggling.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Carrier Wave, for 33 months tier 1 as well. Thanks for everything you do for the community as well, Carrier Wave. Thank you. Carrier Wave also mixed the version of the track that we're listening to right at this very second. Thank you, Carrier Wave. I guess it's December, so I guess you got all the resets.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
TRRS Sankara.
Thank you, Crackety Kraken, as well, for 34 months of Prime. 70 more tracks. I'm gonna have a slow new year. Okay, well I can do that, or maybe, I don't know. I've been saying it for like a year and a half, so who knows if I can. Thanks, Crackety Kraken, for the Prime. Both Carrier Wave and Crackety Kraken very, very close to that elusive 36-month Pearl sub badge.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
TRRS Friendship Triangle.
And look at that. Hey, Antonia. Thanks for 24 months tier 1. And congratulations to Antonia for the 24-month 2-year shimmering golden sub badge. Thank you for that, Antonia. Yeah, no, it snowed a lot last night. I woke up this morning at around 6:45 a.m. to all my power going out, which for some reason leads to like some kind of like a little alarm going on in my apartment. So I got woken up to all the power going out. Fortunately, it wasn't out for too long. A couple hours this morning while they got that sorted out. It's kind of nice, that moment when it does come back too. It came back on around 10 a.m. I was able to make some coffee. I had some coffee and donuts. I watched a bit of the new H Bomber guy video. That was kind of nice. What kind of donuts? There's these like regular glazed donuts that I get from the grocery store. Which I really enjoy. I don't know. They're very cheap. They're just these cheap grocery store glazed donuts. And I have my hot coffee and my donuts in the morning sometimes. I've really been craving the sweet breakfast. Pastry, donut, cinnamon bun, whatever it is. I've really been craving that lately. You have your hot coffee and your sweet breakfast. It's very nice. Yet another thing, one of these cop doctors is going to probably tell me to knock it off. No, don't eat that. I know it makes you happy. I know it's a nice way to start your day in the winter. You only eat alfalfa sprouts and oats, plain. I'm Mr. Doctor. I'll knock you off. Thank you. It's the only way you should respond to that kind of thing. Those kind of threats. And wash your hands to prevent airborne spread of the plague. Exactly. Absolutely disgusting. More doctors need to be attacked with a bedpan a la Steve Austin and McMahon. Well, the only problem with that analogy is that Austin was the doctor in that situation. He was dressed as a doctor, and McMahon was the patient. So. I'll do what I want. Gosh. What are you, my dad? You're my dad? Mr. Doctor? Mr. Fancy Doctor? I guess it would be... I guess I must point out that there is 45 seconds left of a hype train. I hate these early hype trains when barely anyone is here. It's not really useful to me or to anybody. But if you did feel like supporting the show or subscribing or gifting subs today, now is a great time to do it. I'll be sure to try and hit people over the head with that later on in this episode. So, you know, no biggie. Operation Do the Do is a go. Well, that's it, St. Lotus. I don't have a delicious, refreshing Mountain Dew today. I have this Monster Energy Ultra Paradise. It's a Rob, and I'm liking the new logo. Oh yeah, I changed my Twitch avatar again. I feel like it's best, like, branding wise, to just settle on one avatar and just not change it. I've had a hard time with that. I don't know if I'm going to keep this one either. I think this is another temporary one. I kind of liked that AI one for a little while, but then it was starting to bug me. I didn't like it anymore. Eventually, I'm just going to have to settle with something and just fucking leave it. Paradise is good if you had the blue. The blue is good, yeah. I do enjoy that. Yeah, just throw on the Mountain Dew logo. I propose Pixar, Rob, but this is cool too. Pixar, Rob. It's a really way to dilute the Stalinism and all the extreme radical beliefs that I talk about on here. If you have the little Pixar avatar. It's like, this guy can't be that bad. This guy can't be a dangerous radical. Look at this. He's just a little fella. He's just a little guy. I will come up with something eventually. I gotta have some kind of an official like logo. Why are sneakers called baskets in French? Are they called that? I didn't even know that. I did not even know that. I had no idea. I think you should go Avatar in your avatar and make a Navi Rob. I think I should too. There is a Navi Rob. It was Jameson that made one. There was a whole Navi Rob GIF. Ugh. What else did I do last night? I don't know. I helped put up Christmas tree. That was good. I made a nice dinner. I watched some sports. I played a little Fortnite. Picked up a couple victory royales in Fortnite. Not to brag. Not to brag too much here. As you know, I am a pro gamer. And I proved that again on the field of battle. Against all my 8-year-old opponents, I just easily wiped them all out. Easily defeated them.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
I really like the new season too. I wasn't really crazy about the whole OG season thing. I guess it was a fun little novelty, especially for people that have been playing for a while. But I like this new one a lot. Death is but an instant. Cowardice is a lifetime affliction. That's right. I'm often saying that. And yeah, I mentioned the new H-Bomber guy video. With your experiences defeating 8-year-olds in the battlefield, you could be a high admiral in the IOF. Bleep Lord, thanks for 12 months. Tier 1. Thank you, Bleep Lord. 1 entire year. 1 entire year of Tier 1 from Bleep Lord. I really appreciate that, Bleep Lord. Yeah, no, I did watch the H-Bomber guy video. Or the new YouTube. It's not even it's like 3 hours long. It's like a full-length documentary. I fought the dog for it and finally spat out my watch streak. Okay, good. 20 stream streak from Relic. There we go. That's what we like to see. It's longer than freaking Napoleon. Yeah, it's like 3.5 hours. I got past the first 25 minutes.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Let's GOOOTRRS Sankara.
Sunny Sola, thanks for 18 months. Resub at tier 2. No, it was interesting. I don't know. I would like to do that longer form content. I just really don't know where to start. Like, I really would. It's something I think about often. I would really like to start making more stuff like exclusively for YouTube. Not just like taking this show and repackaging it, but I don't know how to start. I don't know how to do it. I don't know. I just don't know. It did get me thinking a little bit about like, and I don't know if this is mentioned in this video because it's so long. It's going to take me a while to get through it, but hey, just Google a bunch of articles, then change the words slightly. It is something I've always been very cognizant of on here. Definitely is like watching. Like we spend a lot of time. We do this show 3-4 hours a day. We spend a lot of time watching other people's content, just sitting here. We watch videos from Breakthrough News, from Ben Norton, a number of other sources, listen to podcasts sometimes. And I've always been very cognizant of that because I don't want to be just like repackaging other people's content. When we do watch those videos, we do try to use it as like and I say we, like it's including everyone in this. We try to use it as like a launching pad to have discussions. You stop the movie, stop the video, you hear something, you have a 5, 10, 15 minute little digression or discussion on it. I really do always try as well to, when we watch something, to share the link in the comments and also encourage people to support the work that other people are doing that I admire and respect. I really try to do that. I am cognizant of like the whole like XQC thing of just like putting on a video and just playing someone else's video and then just saying like, wow, guys, and then just continuing, you know? I'm definitely very aware of that, and I always try to encourage people to support the work other people are doing. It's weird though. It's like, it's kind of as someone, as like a content creator, it's kind of weird to know like where that line is. Where are you just exploiting the work that other people are doing? Are you adding to it? Are you building on it? Are you supporting the stuff they're doing? You know. Greasy Groob, yeah, I did hear the. Well, I actually didn't listen to the episode. I just like, I've never listened to a Canada Land episode. Or actually, that's not true. I think we might have listened to one about the Chinese political interference. I didn't listen to the episode yet, though, where he used my clips where me and Justin Potter and John Elmer were dunking on him. I didn't listen to it. I guess probably we should listen to it. I don't know. I still haven't gotten around to it. I also think it has to be good in this case. Yeah, definitely, like the idea of someone just like, you know, rearranging the words in someone else's work and just presenting it as their own is obviously very different from, I think, what I'm trying to do here. I mean, definitely if anyone whose content that I watch on here ever had an issue with that, I would for sure not continue to do it. You know? Do you feel like doing it now? Fuck, I don't know. I probably should have mentioned it like when he released that episode and try and like turn it into a little bit of a advertisement or marketing for what I'm doing on here. I think the easiest thing you can do without the resources of a studio is to make content that analyzes mainstream media. Yeah, for sure, St. Lotus. And that's something that I do here often, right? And it would just be a matter of kind of like maybe doing some more exclusive looks at that. Here's an idea based on someone's work, but could be a great launch point to a doc series. Collab with Tyler Shipley on a series of Canada in the World segments. I feel like that book and your focus complement each other well. That's true, Old Dutch. Yeah, no, that's a great idea, actually. I guess part of the problem is for me also, I'm not an editor. I don't really know anything about video editing. And I find it really long and tedious to do. I'm pretty sure the kinds of channels we watch are grateful for more people to hear what they're saying. Yeah, definitely Cinnamon Challenge, and like when I do an interview or when I do something and people watch it on their channels, that to me is cool for me. I'm like a smaller presence, right, in these spheres, in these worlds. So I'm thankful when people look at my content. Like as long as it's within reason, right? As long as you're not just like repackaging someone's ideas for your own. Or if you're linking to it, making sure you link to it, making sure you like credit the person whose work that you're looking at. You also taught a lot of people about Man Tracker. That was a fun little stretch, wasn't it? That was fun. Our brief like 2-week obsession with Man Tracker. How can the conflict between Israel and Palestine end? Well, I actually know the answer to that question. Some people like to suggest that like it's complicated, that there's no possible solution, but there is a solution, and that's for the occupation to end. So Israel can stop occupying those lands, and there can be one state. There can be one state where Jews, Muslims, Christians, and other people all live together, and they all have the same rights. And that there should just not be a Jewish ethno-state built on top of these lands, which historically people have lived in from of a number of different religions and cultures and backgrounds for centuries. Lands that are very, very important, especially to followers of every Abrahamic religion. One secular state in an incredibly difficult reconciliation process. For sure, the solution is not that complicated. It doesn't mean that it's going to be, like, easy to do. But that's the way that the conflict ends. Wang Yi and China just stated that they support two-state solution. No, I know that that's been China's position on all this. And, you know, I guess in theory, the idea of having two ethno-states, which is not something that I happen to agree with, like, would probably be better than the current situation. But as we've talked about a number of times, since 1967, and if you're going back to the 1967 borders is difficult for a lot of people. But since that time, the decades now of illegal settlements that Israel has built have made that impossible. So now if you're going to have a Palestinian state, that means that all these settlements and the people that live there, who are some of the most hardcore ideological Zionists, they're going to have to leave or stay, or, stay if they want. But I don't think they're going to be very happy with that situation. I agree with you, but don't you think Israel should firstly take down Hamas? No, I don't. We're seeing right now Israel attempt, in according to their own words, we're seeing them attempt to take down Hamas, as you say, and so far that's resulted in the deaths of 16,000 civilians. So if what we're seeing over the last 45 days is Israel taking down Hamas, then no, I don't think so. As we've talked about a number of times, even if they did successfully manage to take down Hamas, they're just rampant criminality and violence and just this open mass murder campaign has guaranteed that even if Hamas doesn't exist anymore, there will just be another extremist group or another group that's going to come together and mount some kind of counteroffensive. So no, I don't think that. Like what that proposes is something that's totally impossible. So that just means like perpetual war, and Israel's just going to continue to the average everyday violence of the status quo is just going to continue indefinitely. It's like saying, end the apartheid, but first let's destroy the ANC and Mandela because they're terrorists. Exactly. Spy C242, you're not being serious right now. You're just trolling. Come on. We don't need to take that seriously. We don't need to take this kind of thing seriously. Like maybe there's other Twitch streamers that are interested in having these conversations, possibly. I'm not really super interested with it though, so just you can feel free to go do that somewhere else. I love you, but you're not Serious people. Okay, take it easy. Up the Reds, this seems good. I'm gonna save this video and we're gonna look at it in a little bit because I got a number of stuff to look at today. I was just hoping to maybe just like I don't know what that is. Get a little bit more loosey-goosey. Just a little more, just like a couple more minutes of chit-chat before we really like dive into this here. Love a troll who just shows themselves out. Yeah, it's nice. You know? Good morning, Hildy. How's it going? What else do we got? We have anything else interesting to talk about before we really dive into this? So do you condemn Hamas? It really is instructive. The whole Hamas thing is like a joke at this point, but like you see Arabic speakers talking about this and they just say Hamas, Hamas. Hamas. That's how you know it's a scary foreign terrorism organization. Hamas. Fuck. Are we blackpilling today? No, I don't think so. I don't think so, Hildy. I don't think we are. Like I've been feeling a little depressed at seeing this latest wave of propaganda. This is what we're going to talk about today. This latest propaganda push as like so there's a ceasefire. Oh, fuck no, I just skipped all the chit chat again. But like there's a ceasefire for a few days. Right? There's this exchange of prisoners. We see this incredible footage of like Hamas releasing prisoners and dapping them up on the way. There's the dap heard round the world. You know? And then the violence resumes, the bombing resumes, and then it's been all the same narratives, right? Hamas broke the ceasefire. Even Matt Iglesias quote tweeted, "Yours truly, good old Rob," was quote tweeted by Matt Iglesias with the suggestion that the ceasefire, it only ended because Hamas broke the ceasefire. Israel was just so close. They were so willing and ready to just have a permanent ceasefire and resume kind of negotiations, and we're all going to start living next to each other, and we're going to release all the hostages. They were just chomping at the bit to just continue that ceasefire until mean old Hamas forced their hand by breaking the ceasefire, just as they forced their hand on October 7th. The ceasefire, which of course Israel was very respectful of, as they were assassinating journalists and just carrying out their everyday status quo violence and dehumanization. Israel was just they were right on the verge. They were right on the verge of a permanent ceasefire until Hamas broke it. According to Matt Iglesias. And so the ceasefire ends, and you know, they've killed, did they kill 700 people in one day? Once it resumed? The bombing campaign resumes. The nonstop stream of horrifying images and videos resume. And so that happens, and then right at the same time, now the violence is happening again. The daily brutal bombing campaign, carpet bombing campaign. They're bombing the South in Khan Yunis now, where they told people to evacuate to. They said evacuate the North, go to the South. Now they're bombing the South. Now they have little bombing zones where they're telling people to go every day. Oh, you can't be in the death zone today. And if you're still there, well, we can't help what happens to you. So all that continues. And like, what's our media talking about? Right? Are they talking about the resumption of this violence? Are they talking about the 16,000 now dead civilians? Are they talking about the 700-800 people that were killed in one day when this bombing campaign resumed? What's our media talking about? Well, our media is talking about roving Hamas rape gangs. On October 7th, the roving organized Hamas rape gangs. They're talking about that. They're talking about Jewish-owned bookstores and restaurants being protested. They're talking about people on city buses in Canada yelling at people and making them uncomfortable. It's like you see there's like this memo that went out basically. This memo basically went out. And then that's what people focus on, Then we start, and then we're on the back foot. If you subscribe to this kind of like discourse, then you're on the back foot. Now you're denying. Now you're trying to apologize for. You're denouncing this, or you're on your back foot on the defensive, and that's what's going on. Now you got Pramila Jayapal on CNN being forced to denounce Hamas rape gangs, and then does so. Because obviously, who's going to say no? I support this kind of like horrible sexual violence. Obviously, no one is going to say that. So she does that, and then she's still being like held up as this like example of not condemning it enough or like supporting it, implicitly supporting it, and that's what our media is doing now, And I think it's really, that's what we do on this channel, right? Is we talk about these narratives. We talk about the kind of propaganda that we're constantly inundated with. And I think it's really telling, the completely indefensible, dehumanizing violence that we've seen in Gaza over the last 50, 60 days now. Indefensible. The nonstop stream of horrifying images of children, other civilians, babies. 16,000 deaths so far. 16,000. Like, really try and sit with that number, right? Really try and... That's like almost the population of the town that I grew up in. 16,000 people and climbing. And then look at the news cycle. The news cycle just, and it can only be an undercount for sure. Thousands more buried under rubble right now. And then look at the news cycle. Roving Hamas rape gangs. Do you condemn the rape gangs? This guy's fucking like Israeli restaurant. Some people yelled slogans outside of it one evening. This supporter of the IDF. Do you condemn that? It's like clockwork, honestly. Like it's Monday morning, the news cycle kicks off, and that's like the memo has gone out. This is what we're going to be talking about. This is what we're focusing on. CBC still using the Israel's war on Hamas construction. Yeah, and you'd think like we've talked about carrier wave, when we've talked about this, like we looked at specifically what CBC has been talking about. Basic journalism standards, I think, would require you, even under the kind of guise of like what we teach people about journalism in school, would tell you to not just accept that framing, not just accept the framing that Israel's presenting or the IDF's presenting. How do you kill 16,000 people, civilians, and then still let them claim that it's a war against Hamas? Like, it's just completely nonsensical. And it should be pointed out too that, and we can look into this further, and we're going to, with all this whole narrative about the roving rape gangs, which was on day one, on October 7th or 8th. Like, that's when that narrative started. Remember all this shit about dragging women through the street and stuff, and that one woman at the music festival was used as an example, who later turned up alive. Who knows whether she's still alive now or what's happening, you know? Gaza's been under complete total bombardment, including hospitals, for over a month now, so who knows who's still alive and who's not. But that was day one. Day one, we got the roving rape gangs, we got beheaded babies, whatever else it is, you know? Pregnant women getting fetuses cut out and stuff like that. It's just the most horrifying, like, atrocity porn you can imagine, which is all also a direct copy paste of like actual legitimate things that have happened to Palestinians throughout the years also. Went to a rally this weekend, and the media's report on it framed the death toll of Palestinians as purported by the Hamas-run health ministry. And yeah, that's our mainstream, objective, human rights-loving journalists here in Canada. Increasingly descriptive violence assaults, usually of beautiful women, exactly. And so this is coming from an article in Haaretz, and I've credited a lot of the journalism that Haaretz has done over the last few weeks, 6 weeks. But that article that's being used now to like push this narrative, which apparently proves it, no actual accounts, like no firsthand accounts, no actual evidence of this happening. The only evidence comes apparently from Hamas prisoners. So it's like, yes, some of the people that we've captured and brought to our torture dungeons have told us about these crimes. Because remember, we're not just talking about sexual assaults that happen, but in organized gangs specifically determined to commit sexual violence, right? That's what the claim is here. And no physical evidence and no actual first-hand accounts of any of this. And I've always been careful when we talk about this, not to just have like a blanket denial of anything. Like I've said with October 7th, I've never had this like blanket refusal to accept the idea that terrible things happened, you know? And when it comes to like sexual violence in these contexts, I mean, that's a really common feature of wars and conflict, and it's horrifying. And like, we don't know, like I wasn't there. We don't know if that kind of thing happened. What I do like to try and do, though, is question this narrative that's being pushed from a security apparatus here in the West and in Israel that constantly lies, you know? When it comes to these, not only the sexual violence, but just like the idea that that's what October 7th was, just this purely, this crazed attack against civilians. And that's all it was. I mean, I think it's been important to push back on that idea. And I'm not going to deny that terrible things have happened, you know? But I think when we talk about that, we're talking about the context with which that kind of violence is happening. I saw on, we've talked about slave uprisings. We've talked about other kind of like colonialist uprisings, the Indian Mutiny, Vietnam, the Viet Cong, what they were doing. All the same accusations, by the way. All the exact same accusations. I mean, this thing go back to like Jim Crow era South, or even like the slavery times. The idea of like black people as being this like threat, not only to like rise up, but to sexually assault and rape women. And that's why we need to have slavery. That's why we need to have Jim Crow, to protect our women from being sexually assaulted. This is like a trope that has been used in so many different contexts by colonial occupiers, by powerful states, slave states, apartheid regimes, for decades and decades and decades. This is not a new thing. Yeah, and I'm going to agree, Carrier Wave. I want to wait it out as well. It's unraveled a lot in the last couple of weeks, and I think that's part of the reason why there's this renewed focus on pushing these stories. They're aware of the way that the narrative has unraveled. Like the questions we were asking the other day about October 7th. Not to say that like nothing bad happened, but the question is, what's the actual number of people that were killed, which seems to be constantly getting adjusted? What's the actual number of people that are in the IDF that were killed that are part of that number? This seems to be constantly shifting as well. What's the actual number of people that were killed by the IDF, by Apache helicopters, by Crossfire, by tanks bombing these kibbutzes and buildings? Right? We don't need to sit here and say that nothing bad happened, but I would like to know the actual numbers. I would like to know the actual details that's going to come out of this. And that's a good point as well. It's like, even if there were sexual assaults that happened, and we don't know, or even if there was random indiscriminate violence against civilians, which is something that obviously I and everyone in this chat is against. But if that did happen, that does not justify bombing 16,000 people, murdering 16,000 people. Nothing would. Nothing would ever justify that. It's totally indefensible. But I think it's a direct relationship between the way that this narrative that has been presented since October 8th about roving rape gangs, indiscriminate violence against civilians, the way that has unraveled. That's why you see right now, as the body count has continued to shoot up, as this ceasefire has ended, and the mass bombing and the mass murder campaign has resumed. That's why you're seeing now this renewed push to promote these narratives, which again have been used time and time again in order to justify upholding these like violent colonial systems, especially the threat of like organized sexual assault, like the roving gangs of brown rapist hordes. Like, again, this is colonialism 101. This is the whole, like, it's the wagon circle. It's the garden in the jungle and all this stuff. This is why we need to have this. This is why we need to have this protection. This is why we need to be violent ourselves. Is because we're defending Western civilization from these roving gangs of rapists, of violent thugs, barbarians, the barbarian hordes. I mean, it's all the exact same colonialist tropes that we've heard time and time and time again. In British India, in Vietnam, in slavery era America, in the settlement of the American West and Central and South America as well, and Canada also, I should say. In Vietnam, we have just heard this over and over and over and over again. And that's why they're returning to this playbook right now. They're returning to this playbook right now because they are losing the propaganda war. Like a whole younger generation this whole younger generation has seen the violence that Israel's been inflicting with our full support in the West, our full total support, regardless of what our leaders are saying about the behind the scenes urging restraint and all this stuff, our full support. Young people especially have seen what that looks like. And there's this huge, especially mostly generational divide has opened up as people completely reject this predominant narrative about Israel. And again, that's why you're seeing this renewed push to promote these narratives, these very racist, colonialist narratives. What action could the IDF actually take that would cause them to lose the veneer of the moral high ground internationally? Well, dude control, I mean, internationally is a big word because I think they have lost that veneer internationally. I think people around the world recognize that they don't have the moral high ground. If you're just talking about the West in general, I would say nothing. What at this point could really cause Canada, for instance, as an example? What could Israel do that would cause Canada to say, like, okay, we've had enough of this. We don't support this. Like, what could they do that they haven't done over the last 6 weeks? You know? Again, it's been a mass murder, very open. A very open, unapologetic mass murder campaign. 16,000 people. And we've all just watched it happen. We've watched it happen in real time. Bombing hospitals. Every time, like, we get to a point, you know, a couple weeks ago when the hospital was bombed in that horrible tragedy, I was asking, like, is this the thing that's going to maybe cause people to stop supporting this? And then it's like, nope. It gets obfuscated. You know, the whole, the propaganda machine kicks into gear. Oh, we think it was Hamas. We think it was Islamic resistance that actually caused that. And now they've been bombing hospitals nonstop over the last couple of weeks with zero repercussions. They're conquering hospitals. They're raising the Israeli flag over hospitals, which they claim are Hamas command centers, with zero evidence except for fucking cartoons. Our own leaders and our own intelligence apparatus backs them up on this narrative. So they conquer these hospitals with zero proof, no command center, turns out, finally, and no repercussions, you know? No red line for the West. And that's the amazing thing, like St. Lotus, like we've seen, this is how fucking far gone we are as a society. We've seen Reagan. Reagan is significantly to the left of the Biden administration on this. We have evidence from the 80s when Israel was going too far, which is nowhere near coming close to what they're doing right now. And Reagan saying, like, stop this right now. Fucking Reagan. You know, and now no red lines. And we might have a little hand wringing, you know? You saw the one defense secretary who was like, you're moving into a strategic defeat. This is something, I mean, this is good to look at, actually. Yeah, the Contras and Mujahideen funding Reagan. That's right. That's how fucking disastrous this is. When I say that, I don't think you have to hand it to Ronald Reagan. It's just an example of how, like, the liberal, human rights respecting Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau administrations are nowhere near where the Reagan administration was when it came to actually, like, causing them to stop with doing what they're doing. With the clip that you're talking about, Doc, not so strange, where this one defense secretary was like, you're moving into a strategic defeat. There's a really interesting point about this. That I wanted to talk about here. Just one moment while I find this. Because there's kind of like a schism here. And this guy pointed it out in a really interesting and insightful way, I think. This guy, Pinstripe Bungle, who I don't really know all that well. Who says the core divide right now in the U.S. government about Gaza is fascinating because there is a military diplomatic expert bloc who want to preserve U.S. power, begging for an end to the war, against a leadership, executive and congressional, who are committed on an ideological level. I think that's really fascinating. Like, there are people, clear-headed people, that are not because they support Palestine or not because they really care about human rights or any of this stuff, recognizing that Israel's criminality harms U.S. interests and is actually making it much more difficult for the U.S. to preserve hegemony as a result. And they recognize that this criminality is causing this like spiraling, possibly international conflict in an area that they were trying to move on from. But there's a leadership, there's political leadership that are committed not because it preserves U.S. interests, because on an ideological level, they're true believers. They're just true believing Zionists. And on a fundamental ideological level, they just support Israel nonstop with no red lines and no exemptions. Even though it's actually, not only is it barbaric, I mean, the primary reason to oppose this kind of thing is because it's absolutely barbaric. But it actively is going against U.S. interests. It's actually damaging American credibility. It's damaging American hegemony. So you have this kind of thing coming from Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin that kind of really exemplifies this kind of schism that's taking place here. Never read the comments. No. Yeah, Yemen sinking ships protected by the U.S. Navy, like, they did not want to have to be dealing with this shit, you know? And the like bases in Iraq and Syria are being attacked as well. They're literally, it's amazing. Like, that's normally the thing that they would respond to with brutal violence. They're trying as best as they can to pretend that it's not happening. It's actually kind of incredible. Because they wanted to move away from this. They wanted to move away from the Middle East. They wanted to focus on China. They wanted to destabilize Russia and Ukraine and then focus on China. And like, now they've lost in Ukraine. That's another thing that we need to talk about today. It seems like that's now just, even the most hardcore Ukraine heads out there are admitting that it's hopeless and that there's no chance that they can ever win. And all the people in the West that were cheerleaders for that escalation, who don't actually have to fucking live there, are now just saying like, well, I guess I'll move on to something else now. Like, that's really sick to me. So they've lost there. And now they're getting pulled back into this growing conflict in the Middle East, which they wanted to move away from because of their greatest allies' rampant criminality. All these wars end the same, like Vietnam and eventually Ukraine and Gaza, going to get the same terms of peace, but with 20 times the death. Exactly. And that's why I'm absolutely disgusted at some of the people, both in our mainstream media, in politics, and right here on twitch.tv, who were cheerleaders for this thing, who claimed to do so because they cared about the people that live in this place, talking about Ukraine, and have now been unapologetic propagandists for this situation now that is going to lead to the same result with a way, way more dead people, dead Ukrainians in this case. People that they claim to care about. Anyway, let's look at this clip.
This kind of a fight, the center of gravity is the civilian population. And if you drive them into the arms of the enemy, you replace a tactical victory with a strategic defeat. So I have repeatedly made clear to Israel's leaders that protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral responsibility and a strategic imperative. This kind of a
They're not listening, though. That's the amazing thing, though, is that even with statements like this coming from the Biden administration, it's clear that they're not listening. It's clear that they have zero respect They have zero respect for Biden or anyone in their administration that's telling them to ease off. The military is trying to stop the politicians from escalating. Yeah. I think there was a clip from Kamala as well. Like, they're still trying to do this.
President Biden and I have been clear. Israel has a right to defend itself, and we will remain steadfast in that conviction. President Biden and I have also been clear, as Israel defends itself, it matters how. The United States is unequivocal. International humanitarian law must be respected. Too many innocent Palestinians have been killed.
Though.
Frankly, the scale of civilian suffering and the images and videos coming from Gaza are devastating. As Israel pursues its military objectives in Gaza, we believe Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. President Biden and I.
Like, it's really amazing to see them now, trying to have this stance where they've thrown everything into supporting this completely unapologetically. They've whatever political capital they may have had, and I don't think that was very, very much, but they've completely thrown everything into fully supporting this. They're arming them, they're funding them with the no red lines, they've said. They have they've repeated and lended sort of legitimacy and credibility to every single horror story, the beheaded babies, the Hamas command centers, all this stuff. They've fully supported everything that's happening, fully. And now they're still trying to walk this line of saying, we think that they're going a little too far. Of course, they have a right to defend themselves, but they must do this. They must respect international law. They must try and avoid Palestinian civilian casualties. But it's like, that's not happening though. And everyone around the world can see that. Everyone around the world recognizes that they're not doing that. They're not respecting international law. They're not avoiding civilian casualties. They're very unapologetic about this. They keep lending them credibility and just being like, please stop murdering so many children. Please, we're begging you. And Israel is just saying no. Blinken goes over there. He shows up. Blinken's been saying the same kind of stuff. We've urged them to show restraint. We've urged them to abide by international law. We've urged them to avoid civilian casualties. And then they just immediately, sometimes the same day, just carry out atrocity after atrocity, massacre after massacre after massacre. No, they're not threatening them in any way. And all these people, the Biden supporters who have said, they're just powerless. They're powerless to do anything, you see. That's the amazing argument as well. You must vote for the Democrats because if Republicans come into power, if Trump comes into power, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. They're going to have full power to do anything. When they're in power, though, it's just we can't do anything. What do you think, the president can do stuff? You think the president can do stuff? Wow, okay. Welcome to the real world, actually. Where the president of the United States is just completely powerless. They're just completely, totally powerless. And that's it. That's the level of respect that the Israeli government actually has for their American partners, who are just yeah, of course, we'll unquestioningly continue sending you billions of dollars every year. We'll give you our access to the strategic weapons reserves. will totally repeat and co-sign every little bit of atrocity propaganda or, whatever it is, as long as you please just like, stop making us look so bad by constantly massacring civilians. And Israel's just like, no, we don't think so. We don't think so. Is Netanyahu's son still on the beach in Miami? Yeah, exactly. Come on, man, I vouch for you. Just be cool for a little bit. It's like if someone said that to me, it's like the alternate universe version of that. Rob, can you just like, listen, I told my normie friends they'd watch your stream. Can you just like stop talking about like Stalin and that kind of stuff? Just be cool for a couple days. And I'd just be like, no, I don't think so. That's the alternate universe version of that kind of a scenario. If Stalin comes up, he comes up. It's not my fault. Not my problem. Stop scaring them with the DPRK talk. I get a lot of that as well. People do actually say that to me. You're going to turn off potential allies talking about this. Not my problem. I missed the intro. Are you drinking a Mountain Dew like you always have, by the way? So we can do that really funny bit on the front page. I should say... Would I get in trouble for this? Would I get in trouble for this? Can I put a little logo even? The reason that Stalin and DPRK come up all the time is the reactionaries and liberals bring them up. For sure, yeah, they bring them up because that's supposed to be the thing that throws you off and makes you denounce your whole ideology. Yeah, I'm anti-imperialist, but of course I denounce the brutal North Korean regime. Yes, I'm a communist, but of course I denounce, unquestionably the most successful leader of a socialist nation in the last century. Of course I denounce that. That's how they get you. And that's you take that away from them when you just refuse to do that. This whole analogy though, I mean, it's just pointing out the way that like, that's kind of what America has tried to do here with Israel, where they've totally enabled them every step of the way over the last 6 weeks. And they're trying to just get a little something that they can use to like show how they've been successful somehow in convincing them to like pull back, that they've been successful in convincing them to like stop murdering so many civilians, but like they won't get it. They haven't gotten it. Of course I'm a socialist, but I denounce every single nation that's ever attempted it. That's when you get the completely incoherent people that are like that, that whole actually existing socialism argument. It's never happened. Every single time anyone's tried to do socialism, they did it wrong. They did it badly. That doesn't count. I should put the little logo there as well. Socialism is Medicare for all and a hypothetical utopia. Yeah. Socialism is a welfare state funded by imperialism. That's right. So let's look at some of this here.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
DPRK is perhaps the most advanced socialist project on the planet, and that's why they are constantly being lied about by the West.
GMO Radio, thanks for 27 months. Resub a tier 2. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I think my stance on that has always been like, we haven't gone there. We know DPRK is very poor. I don't think anyone would deny that. Why are they poor? Well, perhaps that might have something to do with the 70-year blockade and embargo and the sanctions that have been placed on them. They're militaristic. Maybe that might have something to do with the fact that we, the West, arbitrarily partitioned their country, killed 2 million people, and have missiles, and we have missiles parked on their border now in their own country for the last 70 years. Perhaps that's the reason why. And they're still legally at war. Exactly. Let's look at this. So again, we wanted to talk about this new narrative now. So once again, 16,000 people killed. 7,000 children killed. This ceasefire has ended. They killed 700 people in one day, immediately after the bombing campaign resumed. And that's why, like I've been saying, we have this now new wave, this narrative, the returning narrative about roving Hamas rape gangs. And I wanted to look at this interview with Pramila Jayapal, where again, where she's there as part of the leader of the Progressive Caucus in the United States Congress, trying to advocate for a ceasefire in a situation where 16,000 people have been killed. And then this is what they end up asking her about. And then this is what the whole discourse cycle is about over it.
I want to ask you about sexual violence. And it's kind of remarkable that this issue hasn't gotten enough attention globally. Widespread use of rape, brutal rape, sexual violence against Israeli women by Hamas. I've seen a lot of progressive,
and with intent, like internationally, the attention, the widespread sexual violence against Palestinian women is just never mentioned.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Now, this is geometric friendship.
Thank you, Risk Inverse, for 30 months, tier 1, and for all the support. Thank you. Yeah, the widespread sexual violence against Israeli women. First of all, it has been talked about a lot. Again, this was a prominent part of this narrative for the last 6 weeks, beginning on October 8th, which many powerful people in politics and media obsessively focused on. So the idea that it hasn't gotten attention is not accurate. At the other side of that, though, the widespread and documented with actual testimony and physical evidence, documented, which does not exist in the case of this narrative about Hamas. documented sexual violence against Palestinian women that takes place predominantly in these Israeli prisons is totally ignored. It's not talked about or even mentioned at all by serious journalists. Like, what is this? Dana Bash, serious journalists like her, who are all of a sudden very concerned about this issue, about the use of sexual violence and how it's being totally ignored.
Of women, generally speaking, they're quick to defend women's rights and speak out against using rape as a weapon of war, but downright silent on what we saw on October 7th and what might be happening inside Gaza right now to these.
I work for an organization committed to tackling sexual violence, and it's frightening how successful this framing is in shaping the narrative and the agenda of good, moralistic people who work in this field. For sure, Sam, because who's gonna sit there and say, like, no, I support actually the things that you're claiming? Of course not. No one's gonna say that because no one believes that. No one thinks that that's okay. Not one person who defends Palestinians thinks that sexual violence in any context is like an acceptable or moral thing. No one thinks that. But the way that this gets framed as being like, now you must denounce that, and that puts people in this position. It puts people in this position where then they're defending this like narrative. And they're not talking about the 16,000 dead civilians, the 7,000 dead children, or the rampant sexual violence against Palestinian women. I think Jayapal tries to do that in this interview, but then she's being attacked. She's being attacked for this interview where she didn't condemn it enough. Same reason all the progressives fell for the Uyghur genocide hook, line, and sinker. Exactly. I mean, this like weaponization of human rights discourse. This is how imperialism seeks to totally delegitimize anyone that has a critique of the barbaric and brutal violence of imperialism and neocolonialism. They use this kind of very liberal language about human rights, women's rights, gay rights, trans rights, as a way to delegitimize that critique. And it's very effective. This is why, as I keep saying, as no matter how uncomfortable it makes you, I do think it's important to just reject this framing and not play this little game. Because like when people make these accusations, they're not interested in having a dialogue or understanding or like coming to some kind of impasse. They're not. They're trying to destroy your argument. They're trying to completely delegitimize your argument. As you rain down bombs on children, again, this is the narrative. Like I can't stress this enough. The ceasefire ends, the bombing resumes, hundreds of people killed right away, the atrocities resume, the massacres, the murder of children, and then progressive caucus members that are asking for a ceasefire. These are the questions they get asked. It's not a coincidence. Nobody's talked about Afghanistan. This is a good point, Small Cute Frog. A couple good points here from Small Cute Frog, and I'm going to get to both of them, actually. Nobody has talked about Afghanistan in months, but we're huge on it when America pulled out with regards to women's rights, for sure. I mean, that was a big part of that whole media freakout about the pullout of Afghanistan, was framed in this kind of idea of women's rights. And you point out something else as well. The problem is that Israel has lied repeatedly, and that's just when they're caught. There is no reason to trust them. No, there is not. This is what it comes down to. You don't have to. It would be journalistic malpractice to believe anything that's coming from the Israeli government or the IDF, or that's coming from like an Israeli state media thing, which is relying on testimony of Hamas prisoners. It's journalistic malpractice to assume any of that is true, any of these claims. If it's not verified by video, like actual testimony, actual physical evidence, it's complete malpractice to automatically believe any of these claims, let alone to like just accept them as being truth and then questioning politicians about them. Yet they've been caught lying this many times, over and over and over again. Not just over the last 2 months, but for decades, for fucking years. Always. It's always lies. Let's hear how this goes.
These hostages. Why is that?
I mean, I don't know that that's true. I think we always talk about the impact of war on women in particular. In fact, I remember 20 years ago, I did a petition around the war in Iraq.
Have you said,
saying
have
that,
you talked about it since October 7th?
Absolutely. And I've condemned what Hamas has done. I've condemned
specifically
all
against
of
women?
the acts.
I mean, this should be, I think Owen Jones is another example. This should be like all the evidence anyone needs to understand that like your condemnations of Hamas and your co-signing of all these narratives means nothing. Look what it got Pramila Jayapal. She's saying right now, I've condemned this. I've condemned Hamas. I've condemned what they did. I condemned everything. It's not enough though. She's still asking for a ceasefire. So it's never going to be enough. There's no condemnation that's ever going to say like, okay, well, I'm not going to ask these kind of questions because she's repeatedly condemned it. So I'm going to leave this alone. It doesn't matter. They don't care. They don't care about your little condemnations. It's meaningless. Like that should be example number one. She's saying like in this clip, I've condemned Hamas. I go like, what do you want from me? It doesn't matter though. It does not matter how many times you condemn them. Yeah, I give up. Just murk them all, I guess.
Actions, absolutely. The rape, of course.
And
but
now she's and again, now in the process of asking for a ceasefire, she's admitting to and agreeing with this narrative that there was this kind of rampant violence and sexual violence. So that leaves you with like an incoherent position. Now you're saying, yes, they did commit these atrocities. Yes, they did have this widespread rape gangs, sexually assaulting and raping women. But I support a ceasefire though. You know? It's just a way to completely neuter your whole argument.
I think we have to remember that Israel is a democracy. That is why they are a strong ally of ours. And if they do not comply with international humanitarian law, they are bringing themselves to a place that makes it much more difficult strategically for them to be able to build the kinds of allies, to keep public opinion with them. And frankly, morally, I think we cannot say that one war crime deserves another. That is not what international humanitarian law says.
Okay, with respect, I was just asking about the women, and you turned it back to Israel. I'm asking you about Hamas. In fact,
I already answered your question, Dana. I said it's horrific, and I think that rape is horrific, sexual assault is horrific. I think that it happens in wars.
You know, I appreciate that people in actual positions of power in the U.S. government, like Pramila Jayapal, are trying to do what they can to condemn Israel's violence and atrocities and call for a ceasefire. But I think it is an example of how much of a no-win game that is when you're saying, yes, Hamas is evil. Yes, Hamas committed so many atrocities, including these roving rape gangs. Yes, Israel's a democracy. Yes, Israel's our close ally because they're such a democracy. You know? I'm trying to give credit to someone who's genuinely using their position to call for something that I think is important, which is a ceasefire in this case. But at the same time that you're calling for a ceasefire, it's like you have to check off all these boxes, which totally legitimize what Israel's doing.
Situations, terrorist organizations like Hamas obviously are using these as tools. However, I think we have to be balanced about bringing in the outrages against Palestinians. 15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes, 3/4 of whom are women and children.
And it's horrible, but you don't see Israeli soldiers raping
well, Dana,
Palestinian
I think
women.
we're not.
Jesus Christ, these people are sick. These people are sick. 15,000, but listen, we need to support the democracy. Yeah, and first of all, you do see that. Like, you do. It's horrible, but Yeah, killing 15,000 people and however many women and 7,000 children is horrible, but you don't see Israel doing this. It's like, you do. First of all, you do. It's been well documented. The sexual violence against Palestinian women. So you do see that, number one. But you're hand waving away. Oh, yeah, 15,000 people. Okay, but absolutely sick. And so look, and again, I want to give Pramila Jayapal credit for trying to do what she can to stand for something important right now. You know, I do. But like, this is what that gets you. This is what trying to play that respectability game gets you. You know, you have Biana Golodriga, CNN anchor. This is not some like random like nobody. It's a CNN anchor. Says most wars don't feature premeditated rape as part of the war plan. Individual acts of rape from lack of discipline, which tragically does occur in war, is different than preconceived and premeditated, quote, rapes, which, as one leading expert told me, was Hamas's plan. Who's this leading expert? Who's this leading? She doesn't say. Mrs. Journalist here doesn't seem to mention that. Is not really interested in mentioning that, who that is. So that's what that's turned into. Again, as this news cycle picks up, the ceasefire's over, the bombing resumes, 16,000 dead civilians, and certainly to be more. And you have CNN journalists not only questioning the people asking for a ceasefire and trying to put them in this position where they're claim that they're ignoring or supporting rape and basically forcing them to co-sign every narrative about this out of Hamas being a terrorist organization, which again, people might get mad at me about saying this kind of stuff. You know, Hamas being a terrorist organization, Hamas is recognized to be a terrorist organization by all the predominantly white Western countries. It's not this widespread acknowledgement. It's the United States, Canada, Israel, and a handful of other Western countries who, unfortunately for these people, don't get to just dictate what everyone around the world believes. Yeah, the international community. Exactly. But that's it, you know, the bombings resumed. The mass killings have resumed. The nonstop images and videos of dead kids and babies has resumed. And now we have CNN journalists talking about the preconceived and premeditated rapes, which, as one leading expert told me, was Hamas's plan. No mention of who this expert was. No mention of any actual evidence of this. No proof. Again, I've talked about the piece that kicked off this renewed narrative was published in Haaretz and doesn't actually have any documentation. It doesn't have any actual testimonies. It doesn't have any evidence. It's purely based on speculation and claims that have been made by Hamas prisoners in Israeli prisons. You know, and as nice guy Eddie says in the film Reservoir Dogs, if you fucking torture this prick long enough, he'll tell you he started the goddamn Chicago fires, but that doesn't necessarily make it fucking so. You know, I think this is kind of what I wanted to focus on today, though. I think since that's what we do on here, we talk about propaganda, we talk about the way the media operates in the West, and it's certainly not a coincidence that with the violence resuming, that this is what our media is talking about. And again, I think it's important. I think this is an important point that we all need to learn from, because even when you have people that are doing what they can in that system to advocate for something really important, advocate for a ceasefire, you see the way that these narratives completely delegitimize that and force people to go into this defensive position on the back foot where they basically agree with and co-sign every single narrative about it and then call for a ceasefire. But then you're out there saying, like, I call for a ceasefire against this terrorist organization who committed mass rapes and mass indiscriminate violence and are just the worst. They're basically evil incarnate. Like that's not a coherent position. I call for a ceasefire against the evil incarnate terrorist organization, which I agree did all these terrible things. You know, I don't think that's like a winning argument. But we seem to be recognizing that we've gone so far beyond what we thought they did to control narratives, particularly because this is genocide justification on the basis that just maybe someone was raped. Well, seriously, Ben. I mean, that's literally what she did in that segment, Dana Bash. Yeah. 16,000 dead people. Yeah. Whatever. But the roving Hamas rape gangs, though. You know? Okay. And Simica, for a second I thought you were being serious. Which wouldn't surprise me because I've had people come in here and say all kinds of wacky stuff, but yeah, I think this is a good point. Thank you. I think this is another example of the restraint that Israel and the IDF have shown in direct contrast to Hamas. Israel is going out of their way to safeguard Palestinians. How can you not give them credit for things like this? That's right, and I apologize for some of my statements that I've made. A drone arrives at the porch of a Palestinian family in a West Bank village with a recorded message. If you think about doing anything, we will reach you and will kill you. Moral army is the most moral army in the world. The West Bank, where there's no Hamas. There's no Hamas in the West Bank.
كل واحد اللي بيفكر يعمل اشي احنا نوصله واذا لازم نقتله احنا في وضحة انا بنصحكم انه ديروا بالكم وديروا بالكم على اولادكم كل واحد اللي بيفكر يعمل اشي احنا نوصله واذا لازم نقتله ولا بنسوي اشي ولا بنسوي بشي احنا قاعدين في دورنا مكيفين حل عنا انا بنصحكم انه ديروا بالكم وديروا بالكم.
So, Kira, if that didn't, I don't know if that contributed to the toll or not, but thanks for upgrading to tier 2. I appreciate that, Carrier Wave. You need it for the classic Kubrick emote. Yeah, no, this is just fucking horrifying. Like, not only the use of drones in this context, but like you saw the stories of like these drones equipped with weapons circling these hospitals and like shooting at doctors and nurses and patients. And considering the ways that like Israel has been used, or Palestine rather, has been used as a testing ground for like security technology, like it may not be today or tomorrow, but we will be seeing all this stuff, all the horrors that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. We will be seeing it in the West as well. Once the climate movement starts to get more desperate and that starts to snowball, once the social justice movement or the pro-Palestine movement for that matter, as people got more and more, as we see more and more uprisings based on the various economic and cultural and environmental crises that we're facing, we're going to be seeing all this stuff. Man, fucking grim. So what else are we talking about propaganda-wise? It's not just the roving rape gangs. Oh, let's see. Hold on, Siri. Before we move on from that, let's take a look at this. This should be a with subtitles.
وإذا لازم نقتله.
ولا بنسوي شيء ولا بنسوي شيء، احنا قاعدين بدورنا مكيفين حل عنا.
أنا بنصحكم إنه ديروا بالكم وديروا بالكم على أولادكم. كل واحد اللي بيفكر يعمل إشي احنا نوصله، وإذا لازم نقتله.
Fucked up. In case anyone thought that was like the description of it was inaccurate or something like that. They'll definitely deploy drones that shoot migrants crossing borders. Of course. Yeah, as the climate crisis gets worse, we have migrant caravans both in Europe and coming to America and Canada. You know, absolutely. We're going to be seeing all this stuff. The whole idea of Gaza to begin with. Like, think of in Children of Men, Beck's Hill and Children of Men, which is like really a direct reference to Gaza. Like, that's for sure is coming to our society. Eventually, just all the undesirables. Just going to live in an open air prison, you know? Really disturbing shit. Okay. Let's find fucking John Fetterman. Israel's #1 supporter. It must have come from his official account here. You see the Hamas is shorting stocks propaganda. No, I didn't see that actually. Which is funny. That to me is just the market speaking for itself. I don't know. I thought we were supposed to listen to the market. Here's Fender. So here's the initial clip. So again, it's not just roving Hamas rape gangs as well. This is the other narrative really that I guess we're talking about in our politics and media right now. Protesters in Philadelphia stand outside a Jewish and Israeli-owned falafel restaurant. Falafel, which is again not a Jewish dish. It's a Israeli cuisine. It's completely just stolen from Arab communities. Like I've talked about a number of times, there's so many fantastic, amazing Jewish contributions to like culinary traditions around the world. And it's amazing that these Israeli restaurants just steal shit from Arabs and then package it as their own thing. It's kind of hilarious, actually. Protesters in Philadelphia stand outside a Jewish and Israeli-owned falafel restaurant. Say, Goldie, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide. I don't know. We can debate whether we think it's useful to protest outside these kinds of places. And again, this is not just a situation of someone being Jewish or Israeli. There's a direct connection between the owner of this restaurant and support for Israel and colleagues and workers at the restaurant who were fired for supporting Palestine. That's what no one wants to admit about this. That's now pointing this out. Here's the clip.
So Goldie, you can't hide! We charge you with genocide! Goldie, you can't hide! We charge you with genocide!
So John Fetterman says they could be protesting Hamas. Thank you, John Fetterman. They could be protesting Hamas. They could be protesting. And so Fetterman includes both the narratives, both the whatever demonic memo went out over the weekend to launch this news cycle. Fetterman's got both of them in this tweet. They could be protesting Hamas. They could be protesting Hamas's systematic rape of Israeli women and girls. So that gets mentioned in there as well. Or demanding that remaining hostages be immediately released. Instead, they targeted a Jewish restaurant. It's pathetic and rank anti-Semitism, according to John Fetterman. Protesting Hamas, the organization your government already lists as a terrorist entity. That's right. Well, our government famously sends billions of dollars in aid and bombs and weapons to Hamas, so that's why people would protest that, naturally. Systematic rape, is it different from rape? Yes, it is, Ben, because this is the narrative. They're not saying that like rapes were committed on October 7th. You know, that's not what they're saying. They're saying there is a planned operation that specifically ordered the people that were carrying out this Al-Aqsa flood operation to engage in rape and sexual violence. It was part of the strategy. It was commanded to them, and they were following through on these orders. So it is different. They're not saying, a few sexual assaults happened or a few rapes happened. That's not what they're saying. This was a systematic plan. That was put in place by these barbarians. Again, it's just, for as much as you talk about pathetic and rank anti-Semitism, it's pathetic and rank Islamophobia and racism to suggest that like Palestinians, especially Palestinians that are fighting back against the decades of colonization and apartheid, and like we saw on October 7th, without denying that terrible or bad things may have happened, which is not something that I have done, and certainly not something that anyone in this chat would ever do. But like we said, video footage of Hamas overtaking and attacking these Israeli checkpoints, IDF checkpoints and bases, and technology that's used to monitor and exploit Palestinian people in an open air prison. And it's pathetic and rank Islamophobia and racism to just hand wave that away. All those legitimate, morally and legally legitimate military operations, hand wave all that away and describe it as just roving brown hordes of violent, savage rapists. That's Islamophobia and racism. And anyway, this is not just a Israeli-owned restaurant, in the same way that Indigo is not just a simple Jewish-owned bookstore. You know, that's completely fucking preposterous. But, of course, that's not the case in this situation either. Sorry, there's this guy, Governor Josh Shapiro as well. Again, everyone jumped on board this. Tonight in Philly, we saw a blatant act of anti-Semitism, not a peaceful protest. First of all, it is peaceful. They're not doing anything. They didn't harm anyone. They're literally just chanting slogans outside a restaurant. That's definitionally, that is peaceful. You're saying things into a megaphone outside someone's restaurant. A restaurant was targeted and mobbed because its owner is Jewish and Israeli. This hate and bigotry is reminiscent of a dark time in our history. Like, I'm sorry to keep repeating this, but I just think it's really just to keep reiterating this as this narrative has been promoted in our media and in our political class. Violence has resumed. 700 people killed in one day. Over 16,000 people killed. Over 6,000 children killed. This is the reality. This is what the United States government is supporting right now. And people in the Democratic Party are the ones now, some memo went out and this is what they're talking about. Israeli-owned restaurants being yelled at and roving Arab rape gangs. That's what we're focusing on. And then, of course, it's not just as simple as being. And first of all, I think if you're, if you have a business and you're Israeli and you support the Israeli government and you support the IDF, I think that makes you a legitimate target to have people yell at you when Israel's committing a genocide. And I would feel the same way about any military or any culture. If the United States government was mass bombing Iraq, and you had a restaurant, and you had a big American flag and a big sign that says, "We support the troops," I would support people going to yell at you and saying, "You support killing people." I think that's totally legitimate. But that's not just what this is. It's in the same way that, like, Indigo is not just a Jewish-owned bookstore, according to very serious journalist Jesse Brown. In the case of Indigo, you have the owner of Indigo actively supporting funds that give people money to go join the IDF and murder Palestinians, and helps make sure that they're financially stable, even people that have zero connection to Israel and don't know anyone in the country. The owner of Indigo wants to make sure that anyone that wants to go join the IDF, no matter where you are, and you want to go and shoot Palestinians in the West Bank or wherever else, you can do so. And she's going to work to ensure you have funds to do that, which obviously makes her a legitimate target for protest. And then that's being framed as anti-Semitism. And then you have this story coming out, right? Goldie fired me and a coworker. This is the restaurant owner. Goldie fired me and a coworker for supporting Palestine. They raised money for an organization that claims to be neutral, but in fact materially supports the IDF and its war crimes. It's not a random Jewish restaurant, and these protesters rule and should keep up the pressure. If Mountain Dew does not condemn Hamas, they must be criticized for it. Well, and that's the thing. Mountain Dew fully supports and sponsors this channel and everything that I say on here. So, I think that's something we should keep in mind. That's why they're a proud sponsor of this program. That's why I'm proud to be officially involved with a advertising arrangement with the Mountain Dew Corporation. Do the do. Rob, do so. That's good. Slam Getty coming in hot. That's very good. You might as well call me that, considering how much I enjoy this delicious and refreshing beverage. So that's it. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about in our media. Not 16,000 dead civilians, not the resumption of the violence that our governments fully support, the nonstop stream of horror that we've all seen. This is what we're talking about. Roving Arab rape gangs and Jewish-owned bookstores and restaurants. This is the Canadian version as well. This happened as well. This is going on in Canada also. Toronto, disturbing the scene as intimidating anti-Jewish mob screams genocidal chants on the subway. The TTC and public transportation aren't safe. Another reason to axe the carbon tax so commuters have a safe choice. That's a funny way to pivot back to their preferred narrative here. So first thing about this is it's not in Toronto, it's Vancouver. That's not accurate. Here's the clip though. And also I want to point out too the way that this person is what they say. The last words out of his mouth are, "You fucking Jew," quote. Commuters harassed on Toronto's subway. Jew haters commandeered the car, shouting their genocidal chant at people just trying to get somewhere. This is so funny. Welcome to Justin Trudeau's Canada and Olivia Chow's Toronto. Nowhere is safe. That's a hilarious way these conservatives in Canada are trying to frame this, considering Trudeau as fully, so like, what the fuck do you want Trudeau to do more? Seriously, what do you want them to do more? Like, they've fully supported Israel every step of the way, and these guys are still being like, this is an example of how Trudeau is a secretly pro-Hamas, you know? It's like, it's amazing. What else could Trudeau possibly do to support Israel more than he's already been doing? And first of all, this is all a lie. And number one, I think you can see in this clip as well, this is yet another one of these clips where people are harassed and antagonized, and then their response is captured on video, and then the response is used to indicate some kind of climate. You saw the same thing with that Concordia video the other day. You go after someone, you say, oh, you're going to be raped when you go to Gaza or whatever, and you provoke someone, and then you turn on your camera when they start screaming in your face. I think this is another case of this happening. I'm not really sure what to tell you about that, Leo, about the falafel restaurant owned by an Israeli in your neighborhood. Personally, I just generally eat at falafel restaurants that are owned by Arabs. If it was up to me, I probably would not visit such a restaurant. Like I said, there's many in Montreal, especially. There's many fucking incredible Jewish-owned delis and other restaurants that I really enjoy eating at. So if I want to get falafel, I'm just going to go somewhere else for that. I'm not really sure what to tell you, Leo. You're going to have to, I trust you to make a judgment call on that. Anyway, so here's this clip. Here's this clip about this hate crime on the Toronto TTC, which is actually in Vancouver.
Right now,
we would not like
supporting.
To be harassed on here.
I'm not harassing you.
Okay,
you
fine.
know what you mean.
We don't want to.
What am I supporting?
What am I supporting? I don't want to
desperate.
You're talking. We know what we're wearing. We know what.
So again, you have the person with the phone saying you're supporting terrorism. Like that's where the clip starts. You have the person with the phone. The person in the clip, now this person's lost their patience, right? There's clearly something that's been going on for longer than this clip starts, and this person's now lost patience. The woman in the beginning of the clip says, stop harassing us, right? She's literally like, I don't want to be harassed, please stop. And then the woman with the phone is saying, you support terrorism. And then this person's obviously lost patience, and now you're capturing the reaction and using that to frame some kind of narrative about this climate of anti-Semitism, you know? We've seen a number of examples of this.
You won't even show your fucking face. Is there a reason?
I'm not hiding. I'm right here.
Now
I'm not hiding.
You know who you are.
My love, I'm not hiding.
Do you actually know what you mean? Palestine would be free.
Palestine will be free. I promise you. Palestine will be free.
Gaza was actually free.
Palestine will be free.
You guys are terrorist supporters on God.
You are terrorist supporters.
You're a terrorist supporter.
She's calling them terrorist supporters. The woman with the phone started this situation. I feel bad because look at her. She's been trying to defuse this because she knows exactly what's going on, you know, and she's like, oh, but again, I support these people, but the narrative that this is some situation where there's just these Palestine supporters on the train just harassing people and having genocidal chants on the bus, you know, is not accurate. The person with the phone started this entire situation.
A bunch of people in Israel. That's what they need.
Free Palestine!
She knows now she's going to be in a clip where she's going to get called a terrorist.
Free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
She's calling them terrorist supporters. She's saying, I hope you get fired from your jobs. But she's the victim. Like, this is the Zionist strategy in Israel and internationally. You're the aggressor. You're in Israel, you're committing the violence, or if you're internationally, you're supporting it. You're calling people terrorist supporters or sympathizers. You're saying, I hope you lose your jobs. And then you have a reaction, and then you take the reaction and you say, oh, look at these barbarians. It is settler colonialist strat. It's the exact colonialism playbook. Exactly. You see this over and over again.
Palestine will never die!
Palestine will never die!
Gaza, don't you cry!
Gaza, don't you cry!
Palestine will never die!
Palestine will never die!
From the river to the sea!
From the river to the sea!
Palestine will be free!
Palestine will be free!
From the river to the sea!
From the river to the sea!
He's calling them terrorists. And again, like we've talked about, oh, it's not New York, it's Vancouver. This is Vancouver, even though the people in the clip were claiming it to be Toronto. You know, you're terrorists. You support terrorism. You should lose your job. And like we've talked about, terrorism, like what is that? What is terrorism? What does that word even mean? You know? Is it violence against civilians? Is it when you intentionally target civilians? Is that what terrorism is? Well, if that's the definition, then Israel is, and the United States government, by the way, is the ultimate purveyor of terrorism. They intentionally target civilians. That makes them terrorists. But like significantly more of a terrorist threat than Hamas or any other extremist group could ever hope to be in decades. Like, look at the actual legacy of violence and who has targeted and killed more civilians. Is it the IDF or is it Hamas? No, it's the IDF. By a huge margin, have committed more violence and terrorism than a group like Hamas could ever hope to commit in a lifetime. But then you have people that support Israel and the IDF uncritically claiming that people that are saying slogans support terrorism. I don't know if it's just an artifact that was always going to be this way after the Patriot Act, but the lack of consent for people recording others really has me staring into the void more than most topics. Yeah. I mean, that has a whole lot of widespread sort of negative connotations as well. But I think it's particularly egregious in this kind of case when you're provoking people. You're provoking people who, like, this was quiet. This was not this train filled with people that were doing chants. These were just people probably coming home from a protest who are being harassed and antagonized by someone. It creates this scene, and then they film the scene, and then they use that to suggest that they're the victim of some like hate crime. Yeah, and that's important too, Marty. On the flip side, we don't see what a freak that one guy was for harassing that halal cart. That's a whole other thing as well. Not only that guy, but like the violence against Palestinians or violence against people of color in the United States and Canada. Like, for a long time, Palestinians were saying, we're being massacred, we're being genocided, we're being murdered, we're being targeted. And people were saying like, you're just exaggerating. You know, that's not really going on. That's not really happening. This is why the shift has happened, is because now we can see it. Not only in Palestine, but in America. We see the violence. When black people would say, we're being killed by the police, we're being harassed by the police. No, you're criminals, you're thugs, you deserve it. And now we actually see the result of that. We actually see what that looks like. And that's what changes people's minds. So, like with everything, I think the internet in general has had very positive consequences on some level and had incredibly negative consequences on another level. You kind of have to just take all of that and you know, try and learn something from it. A guy in Victoria tried to run over a guy in a cafe and it got caught on vid. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. I mean, we could even look at that next. I think this case is really illustrative, though. I think we've seen a lot of this. It's not just Zionism, but it's colonialism in general, like we were saying. You know, you're the oppressor. You're the violent one. You're the terrorist. You're harassing people. You're saying you support terrorism. I hope you lose your jobs. And when you have a response, you keep people in a open air concentration camp for decades. You murder and bomb with total impunity. And when they fight back, you're the victim. You're the oppressed. And I'm just going to keep repeating this. I'm sorry if it's annoying. I'm going to keep repeating this for anyone that's joining the stream, though. This is the context that all these narratives are happening in, is a resumption of violence, the ceasefire ending, hundreds of people killed already in the resumption of the bombing campaign, over 16,000 people killed in Gaza. And what we're seeing in our media, in our politicians, are talking about scary anti-Semitic incidents of scary slogans being chanted on the train, and Jewish-owned bookstores and restaurants being targeted. And what about the mass roving Arab rape gangs? What about that? Like, what's the narrative going to look like? Like, what's when it gets to even higher, the body count? Yeah, when it gets to 20,000 or 25,000, it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be even more unhinged.
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Kijiji, thanks so much for 5 gifted subs. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, Nazis cried out when the Warsaw Uprising happened and other instances of resistance and used that as an excuse to carry out their final solution. Familiar? Yeah, and yet when you make the connection between Zionism and Nazism, you get called anti-Semitic. Like when people show up to pro-Palestine protests and have signs that equate, and there's a documented link between Zionism and Nazism, and they get called anti-Semites and Nazi supporters, incredibly. I read a Baffler article yesterday, Palestinian workers in Israel. Israel depends on tens of thousands of Palestinians to work in construction and healthcare. But now Palestinians are not allowed to work in Israel, so they're importing Indian and more Thai workers. The article really highlighted Israel's dependency on an underclass of exploited workers. Yeah, and it's like there's a lot of interesting narratives too about people in these kibbutzes that had, like, I had Palestinian people in my community like working as gardeners and stuff, and we trusted them, and now they drew maps to come to our home and like take away our TV and stuff, and they came in our house and were watching TV. You know, they should have been thankful. They should have been thankful that we allowed them to like be there, and we were like had this kind of like we were not so cruel to them. Settler mindset. Yeah, and again, as always, I just draw a direct link to that in the Jim Crow South, where some white families had black women as caregivers. Yeah. I mean, there's so many links with that Jim Crow era or the slavery era, and the threat of these organized brown and black rape mobs are one of the central components of that, of justifying that hierarchy. This is what I said in this tweet today where I talked about this. It's colonialism 101. It's directly out of the handbook. Let's see what else we have here. Oh, and by the way, so if it wasn't enough also that, what was it, 450 to 1 in the House the other day that they voted on that, I don't know if it was a legislation or there was that vote to condemn Hamas, which kind of like hinted at the equation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, but that wasn't enough, I guess. Now there's a new measure that's being proposed in the House that explicitly says this. It explicitly makes this equation that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism in the U.S. House. Yeah, and people are going to be pressured to vote for that, and if they don't, they're going to say that they voted against a measure to condemn anti-Semitism. Who was the one no? The one no was this fucking deranged Tea Party guy. No, it wasn't Rashida Tlaib. The one no was a deranged libertarian Tea Party guy. To show how absolutely pathetic that is. And even the people like in the House that have tried to have consistent moral stances on this are still like getting pulled into that kind of thing and being forced to support it and co-sign it. Let me just see if I can find that actually. Yeah, look. Okay, so here it is. So the one wasn't enough. The one resolution wasn't enough. A new House resolution, which may be voted on as early as tonight, clearly and firmly states, quote, this is a quote, clearly and firmly states that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. This comes after a previous resolution hinted at that claim, but did not fully state it. So now Congress wants to leave no question. But there's an additional trap. Anyone who votes against this resolution will be said to have voted against condemning anti-Semitism. Here's the resolution, HRES H94, strongly condemning and denouncing the drastic rise of anti-Semitism in the United States around the world. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to keep saying it. 16,000 dead civilians. That's a low number. 16,000 dead civilians, 7,000 dead children. And the figures are changing all the time. This is the context with which these claims are being made. The resolutions to combat the dangerous rise of anti-Semitism. The Israeli Jewish-owned restaurants and bookstores being targeted. It's just innocent, peaceful people on the train being harassed and screamed at by terrorist sympathizers. The roving Arab rape gangs. What about those? You're calling for a ceasefire, but have you condemned that? Jews are not a monolith, but they're also an entire state that is also not an ethno-state. Well, and again, we've seen many Jewish activists with Jewish Voice for Peace, if not now, occupying train stations. They've been essential. If you've been to any one of these pro-Palestine rallies, there's been a contingent of pro-Palestinian, anti-Zionist Jewish activists at every single one of these protests. This resolution claims that those people are anti-Semites. Is this a symbolic resolution or does it have legal implications? I mean, I believe it's mostly symbolic, but when they're entrenching this idea that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are just like completely linked, fully linked with one another, like, I don't think it's hard to imagine a future where like hate crime charges can be pressed against people that are protesting Israeli apartheid and are protesting Zionism. if you officially fully make that link that is a form of anti-Semitism, then like where does that go? What's the next step towards that? You know, where's that leading? Resolution: strongly condemning and denouncing the drastic rise of anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world. Whereas acts of hate, intimidation, discrimination, and violence based on ethnicity or religion have no place in our country, nor in the global community. Resolved that the House of Representatives, 1, strongly condemns and denounces all instances of anti-Semitism occurring in the United States and globally. 2, reaffirms and reiterates its strong support for the Jewish community at home and abroad. 3, calls on elected officials and world leaders to condemn and fight all forms of domestic and global anti-Semitism. 4, clearly and firmly states that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And again, there's a tension here. We reaffirm and reiterate our strong support for the Jewish community at home and abroad, and also clearly and firmly state that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. When you have, like, it's not supporting the Jewish community at home when you have jackbooted thugs, militarized police officers assaulting people outside the DNC or in train stations or whatever, assaulting Jewish activists. That's not supporting the Jewish community. That's not supporting the Jewish community when you have Jewish activists protesting against apartheid and genocide and having militarized police come in and beat the shit out of them. Do they not count as being the Jewish community? I asked that question. It's a rhetorical question because no, they don't. They don't count according to this kind of ideology. And 5, rejects all forms of terror, hate, discrimination, and harassment of members of the Jewish community. That's amazing. It rejects all forms of terror, hate, discrimination, and harassment of members of the Jewish community. Well, just one moment here. One more time here. I want to make sure this is the right... No, it's not. Read this one more time. Rejects all forms of terror, hate, discrimination, and harassment of members of the Jewish community. Does this count as that? Does this count? What is this? What are we looking at here? Does this count as terror and harassment of the Jewish community when you have Jewish activists getting attacked by militarized police officers? Does the resolution cover that, or? And the answer is no. These people don't count. These Jewish activists do not count as being members of the Jewish community. Kicking over candles that were lit to represent the victims of the Israeli regime. So do you know what I mean? It's like, no, I don't think like a non-binding resolution is going to have legal consequences necessarily, but it's not hard to imagine where that could possibly go. If you're suggesting, if the United States government is fully co-signing this idea that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, which that explicitly states, it's not really hard to see the way that that could be used legally to attack and possibly arrest, or at the very least harass, people who are protesting the actions of the Israeli government. Okay. I think I'll just take like a short break. If you don't mind, folks, I'm just going to take a short break. I've not been taking a lot of like breaks during the stream over the last couple of weeks. I think I'd just like to take 5 minutes. I didn't really eat any lunch or anything like that. I'll take a short break, and then we'll find some video content or something else to do for the rest of the day. I know there's a number of other things we can take a look at. Like, we're certainly not finished talking about this. If you can, folks, if you tuned in today, whether you're tuning in for the first time, if you're a lurker or a new viewer of the channel, or you're a regular chatter community member, if you can, please support TRRS by subscribing. It's the only way that I'm able to continue doing this program every single day. I do this show every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. The only way that I'm able to do so is through the generosity of the community members. As you know, I must make the line go up. I must make the little number go up every day in order to keep doing this. So if you can, if at all possible, please subscribe to TRRS. It's $5 a month. You can gift subscriptions or bits. Every little bit helps.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Slub to rib.
Moist Owlets, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Yeah, as you know, it's the only way that I'm able to keep doing this show. So if you found this community or this analysis, commentary, whatever you want to call it, if you found it useful or helpful at all today or any other day, please, if you can, subscribe. I really do appreciate it a lot. Every little bit helps. People in this community are really, really extraordinarily generous, which is something that I really do appreciate. And that's all. Please subscribe if you can.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this. You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
I too will enjoy the yellow badge.
Magyar guy, thanks for the 12 months. There you go. You got a brand new.
You can count on me. You're going to have
badge.
good old
Very
Rob
cool.
to talk you through all this.
I've found this stream useful and helpful.
Thank you, Low Observable Goat, for 28 months of Tier 1. I appreciate that. And thanks also to Mercurial Shroom 420 for the 2 gifted subs. I really appreciate the 2 gifted subs. Very, very cool. And in fact, that puts you at a total of 5 gifted subs in the channel, which, as you know,
you can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
An elite member of the Friendship Triangle community. So thank you for that. And thanks, Moist Owlets, for a gifted sub as well. What the fuck is this? St. Lotus. Oh my god. Good lord.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Like, again, you've seen things like die-ins, people trying to illustrate like what the mass death that we've been subsidizing, what that looks like. And then you have people doing this like rape reenactment. based on things that we don't even know to be
You can count on me. You're
true
going to
at
have
all.
good old Rob to talk you through all this.
TRRS drums.
Ben and PS, thank you so much for the gifted sub. I appreciate that, Ben. And thank you, Shoshipi, as well, for 6 months, tier 1. I really appreciate that also. Yeah, King of William, I just talked about that about 5 minutes ago.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
Gald Greek, thank you for the 400 bits. It's very kind of you. It feels like, no, it does feel like a weird fetish, totally. I mean, it's on the same level as when like pro-Israel supporters say to like queer people, I hope you go and get assaulted in prison. I hope you get raped, or talking to women or whatever. I hope you get your fingernails pulled out. It's like, it seems like you kind of like have a weird, almost sexual fixation on this.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
TRRS Sankara.
Rayback 92, thanks for 4 months of tier 1. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I really appreciate everyone who supports this channel. I really do. Thank you for indulging me when every day I have to do this whole song and dance routine. Of trying to make the little number go up. I appreciate that people show up to this community and tolerate that. I can't imagine what else compels them to reenact it. Yeah, that's fucking really weird stuff. Really, really weird. Jesus. There's some music here. Who is organizing them? That's a good question. I'd be interested to know the answer to that myself. I think the whole question about like who funds, like I think that's an example of the way that like Zionism and anti-Semitism are. That's the amazing thing. We have the House passing a resolution to suggest that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are one and the same, when there's ample evidence that Zionism and anti-Semitism are far more linked. And I think an ultimate example of that is you have people who support Israel, and according to this definition of anti-Semitism, are not anti-Semitic because they support Israel. They support the IDF. And you have the same time, these same people suggesting that, like Elon Musk is an example of this. He did that in that clip when he told the advertisers to go fuck themselves. He explicitly said this, that these pro-Palestinian rallies are being funded by Jews. That's the amazing thing.
This is some guy, Rob Russo, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
Hey, Majority Report, hello. Thank you for the raid. I really appreciate the raid from our friends at Majority Report. Welcome in, raiders. Thank you for joining. Oh no, Sam Sater, what a fucking nightmare. I wish I could actually just make, when I get raids from Majority Report, I wish I could just play that specific clip. No break for Robbo. There it is. How was the Majority Report stream today? I hope it was good. This MF says majority. That's right, I do. That's how it's pronounced. I don't care if it's Sam Cedar or whoever else. They're saying it wrong. Major. Majority. Major. What's the problem? I'm saying it right, and it's everyone else that says it wrong. Oh my goodness, Dave, very, very kind of you 1,000 bits. I really appreciate the 1,000 bits from Dave M1. Thank you, Dave. Welcome to the ideological core of contradiction and fascist ideology. Wouldn't be able to function without it. Like, again, Dave, the whole Sartre quote about the anti-Semites and how they delight in these contradictions. I think it's really fascinating the way that applies to supporters of Israel. Another 20 seconds left in this hype train, folks. 10 subs to go. You know, one brave hero could come through and get all the way to the sub goal. You've made your report. You came in at just the perfect time. The perfect time. Now you have an opportunity. You have a chance to help get this stream to the sub goal. Isn't that exciting? Isn't that so exciting? What an exciting opportunity.
Okay, Rob. Seriously,
oh,
wow.
Holy Lord. Flower the talking flower. I gave my prime sub to a sexy lady. Nor can't argue with that. Speak and it shall be done. Flower the talking flower, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the very, very generous 10 gifted subs. That's so kind of you. I really, really, really appreciate that. Instantly making you an elite member of the Friendship Triangle system.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
You can't count on me. You're not going to have Bob here to yell at you through none of this.
Joe 110, thank you. That's like the Mirror Universe Rob. Mirror Universe Rob is a goatee and says stuff like that. Thank you, Crackety Kraken, for an equally generous 1 bit. Thank you for that as well. You have a goatee now. This doesn't count as a goatee. No, I wouldn't count this as a goatee. It would have to be the full Spock. First of all, like, mine doesn't connect. Maybe in like another 10 years it might eventually connect there, but it doesn't connect enough to be the full evil goatee. So, I'm not quite there yet. Hello, Goth Bimbo next door as well. An important shout out. New chatter, new community member. Goth Bimbo next door. Regime pilled, I mean, same, you know? Same. Okay. So, I am just going to take a really brief timeout. And in fact, I'll go ahead and put on some kind of video content. I don't want to go for too long because people just showed up here.
Here's one thing you need to do before buying anything online. Don't spend another dime on Amazon.
I'm sorry. Not this. Valued community member, Goth Bimbo next door. That's right. There is a clip here from Breakthrough News, though. Arab American voters hold Biden responsible for genocide and hate crimes, justifiably. So let's take a look at that, okay? I'm going to throw on that video. I'm just going to very quickly run to the restroom and maybe like heat up a slice of pizza or something that I can eat for lunch. So please enjoy that. I'll be very quick. Don't go anywhere. Here's my friends, Eugene and Rania, and they count as being friends. Both of them have appeared on this show, and I really appreciate the work that they do over at Breakthrough News. And I want to just take a brief moment before we play this video to say thank you to our sponsor, Mountain Dew, who sponsors this program. I have a very lucrative contract with Mountain Dew, and they agree with all the things that I say on here. Mountain Dew. Do the do. You support the work that they do. That's right. Absolutely. Thank you, Mountain Dew, for supporting Palestinian liberation by any means necessary. By any means necessary. Mountain Dew fully supports that. I would be forced to at least chuckle about that if this was the bit that finally got me taken down. The thing about jokes, though, is you don't have to explain them. And in fact, when you explain, it's like a magic trick. When you explain the joke, even when it's very, very obvious, it becomes less funny. Anyway, here's Rania Khalek and Eugene Poirier. I'll be right back.
Moving forward here, Rania, and we turn into a topic that is, I think, been very much in the minds of many of us in the most recent days, and that is the very distressing rise of hatred against Palestinians, those perceived to be Palestinians, and Arabs and Muslims here in the United States in the context of the slaughter in Gaza. And we are very, very honored to be joined for this segment by Abed Ayub, who's the executive director of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee. Abed, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Well, it's an honor to have you here with us. And I guess I was just hoping to ask you first, I mean, obviously the shooting of these 3 young students in Vermont, I think has just been something that's captured all of us. But I wanted to start maybe by taking one step back. I mean, what have we really seen since October 7th in terms of increases or spikes in terms of discrimination against those that people perceive to be Arab Americans?
You know, it's been we have seen a drastic rise and an increase, but I want to say the numbers don't tell the full story, right? And I know we've had a lot of comparisons with post 9/11 and what we're seeing now. The main difference is in the types of attacks and the types of incidents that are targeting the community. Post 9/11, you had your regular, run-of-the-mill discrimination or somebody being harassed at a supermarket or being bullied at school, and we're not minimizing those, but these are the types of things we saw in the community with the hate crimes. This time around, it's sophisticated and it's very planned. So the attacks against the community didn't just happen, organically. As there was a switch that turned on that began with trying to silence, doctors, attorneys, and professionals by going after them at the workplace, reaching out their employers to make an example out of them. So if they can make an example out of these professionals, get them fired. They wanted to, again, silence the community, put fear in the community, and then couple that with the language that was being used, the dehumanizing language that was being used, is still being used by a lot of the elected officials, including the president, during the early days of October, and the attack on our student groups. So we were getting and still getting hit in every direction. Yes, we can give you the numbers. There's been thousands of intakes between the major Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim organizations that we've counted. There's been hundreds of our community members that have been fired. But the way these happen and the way they're happening is very problematic. And all of that culminates with the general public, the people that are watching all of this happening, dehumanizing us, thinking it's okay to speak this way or it's okay to hate Arabs, to hate Palestinians. That's why you have a 6-year-old in Chicago that was stabbed and killed, and his mother was also stabbed. That's why you have 3 Palestinian student, in Vermont who were shot because the language and the climate is bad, and contributing to that is the way these attacks and the way these have been planned against us.
Abed, you've been working on this sort of thing for a very long time, and this does seem quite unprecedented. I mean, I'm not in the States, but just from what I've seen from abroad, it's quite shocking to witness some of the open displays of racism. But it's not just, I mean, you're mentioning that this is coming from somewhere, right? Like, obviously, people are being incited because Arabs and Palestinians and Muslims are being dehumanized in the media, as well as by officials. I mean, I think it was really shocking to all of us to see this gentleman who in New York City was repeatedly going and harassing this cart vendor, knowing he was being videotaped, and just openly calling for more deaths of Palestinian children, saying that at that point 4,000 hadn't been enough. And it turned out he had worked for the State Department. And I could be wrong. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but up until now, I have not heard a condemnation for. I know he was ultimately arrested and charged, but I heard no condemnation from any official in the Biden administration or anybody who worked with him in the Obama administration. I mean, this wasn't just some middleman. This was somebody who was in charge of the Israeli-Palestinian file in the State Department at one point, I believe, under Obama. He had won several awards at the State Department. And I think this speaks to a really serious issue in the highest echelons of power in the United States. I mean, what are Arab Americans supposed to do under these circumstances when the people in charge of not just Republicans who we're used to hearing genocidal rhetoric from, but from Democrats who are always talking about inclusion and equality and diversity, when they're the ones also saying these things that are basically not only dismissing the fact that Arab Americans have a basic right to be treated as, citizens of their country with human rights, but also they're engaging in dehumanizing and in some cases you could say genocidal rhetoric.
At Great Big Canvas, we believe everyone should experience the power of art.
I'm not actually sponsored by Great Big Canvas, but I'm getting the ad because I've used it. I bought stuff from there, and I actually do find
it inspires
a pretty decent
and transforms
resource.
We are classic art enthusiasts. Contemporary.
You're right. You're absolutely right. There's been no condemnation from the State Department or the Obama administration or anybody that we've heard of come out against this guy. And an important point you touched on, this is not only from the Republican Party or conservatives.
And some of these stories as well. Keep all this in mind when we talk about the resolution combating anti-Semitism and all the breathless stories about Israeli restaurants, or as it gets framed by politicians, Jewish-owned restaurants. Israeli restaurants or Jewish-owned bookstores like Indigo, the multi-billion-dollar corporation that supports the IDF. Or the wave of harassment of these people on the trains, all the stuff we've been looking at. Like, this is what we're talking about, the dangerous climate. When you have, like, Palestinian children being murdered, you have Palestinians being shot in the street. No movement from the House. No movement from the House in the United States Congress to pass any resolutions about Islamophobia or to protect Palestinians or Arab Americans. And the wave of harassment and incitement that they're dealing with right now, either at the same time. I love that you pay for Nitro, but not YouTube Premium. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I pay for YouTube Music. Like, isn't that enough? I already give YouTube some money for the music stuff. I can't get some premium. I'm not giving them more money.
The hate is coming from, it's bipartisan hate. We're calling it. Like, it's coming from all directions. It's not isolated to like one geographical area. You're seeing it happen in New York. You're seeing it happen in the South and in other parts of the country. So it is, again, it's not an isolated thing. And it's not, we are seeing it coming from Democrats that are contributing to this, and coming from, progressives and liberals that aren't really, willing to stand up with Palestinians, willing to stand up with Arabs, and are contributing to the rhetoric. The issue we had within a week or two, we immediately felt, actually sooner than a week, like we felt abandoned, where a lot of the allies that were marching in 2017 with, going to the airports and a lot of these larger, organizations based out here in DC that were ready to stand with the Muslim community, with the Arab community, they were nowhere to be found. They were silent and would not return phone calls, would not engage, even though we warned them about the impeding hate crimes. The everything started on October 7th. By October 8th or 9th, we were emailing all our partners, our government partners, saying hate crimes are going to rise. We're going to see some attacks against our community. We need to start working together to preempt this and get ahead of this. There was no responses. The only response, the only time we began receiving responses was when Wadea was stabbed in Chicago. That's when people realized, okay, this is this isn't BS. Things are really happening. We need to pay attention. But it's at that point it was already too late. It's already going, and it has not slowed down. We're seeing it happen again all over the country. We saw the shooting in Vermont this past weekend, and unfortunately, I believe we're going to see even more in the coming future targeting our community. So it's a tough time right now in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it really is amazing. And I mean, it seems to me also that there's an element of this that, well, one, it just strikes me as deeply paternalistic in some ways now, as sort of, people coming out now that the elections, it looks like people are saying, oh, we don't want to vote for this person or vote for that person. Now, all of a sudden, you see a lot of the politicians mouthing the words, oh, well, we're against this and we're against that. But it seems to me that one other issue here is, this to some degree is sort of, reality based. And so on the one hand, you have the Biden administration rolling out
this stuff from these absolutely deranged racist liberals suggesting that oh, you're not going to vote for Joe Biden? Well, have fun getting deported. At what point is that obviously just a threat? Right? It's not it's not trying to build coalitions. It's not trying to speak to their better human rights record. It's just threatening people. That's what it is, right? If you don't vote for Joe Biden, this is what people are telling Arab Americans right now. If you don't vote for Joe Biden in the coming election, you're going to get deported. That's just threatening someone. That's just a threat. And also, Biden is deporting as many people as Trump did. And Ainsley, it's also worth pointing out, especially when people talk about, oh, you're going to get deported. You can't deport someone that's an American citizen. Many of these people that they're lecturing are just Arab Americans, in Michigan or wherever. Oh, have fun getting deported. Because it's ultimately suggesting that someone that's Arab or has that background aren't really a citizen. They're not real citizens, even if they are born here. Even more kids in cages now. Well, the thing is, they're not kids in cages. They're not cages. They're youth detainment facilities. They're youth detainment facilities. Yeah, and if they're women, have fun getting sexually assaulted by Hamas. That's right. Yeah. It's just a way to browbeat and threaten people.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Oh, my.
TRRS MRX.
Don Dark Zoni, thanks so much for 36 months tier 1 and for all the support. Congratulations to you on the brand new 36 month, that's 3 year Pearl TRRS sub badge. Thank you for everything, Don Dark Zoni. But that's it. That's our the enlightened, human rights loving, hate has no home here liberals. Just browbeating and threatening racialized people who don't want to support the Biden administration while they're continuing to deport people and sponsoring a mass murder campaign in Gaza. In this house, we believe, like you can be with those signs. In this house, we believe that Arab Americans that don't vote for Joe Biden should be deported and have their fingernails torn out. That's why that Stuart Semelowitz guy, or whatever his name is, was so instructive. We're gonna have your parents are gonna be arrested. Your parents are gonna have their fingernails pulled out by the secret police, because it's just like saying something that that's like we're surrounded by Stuart. I may have called him Smellowitz. I'm going to retroactively say that was a joke and a burn, but we're surrounded by those people, you know? We're surrounded by Stuart Smellowitzes. They're the liberals in all our institutions, in politics and media and the NGO world. That's who is like making the decisions. This is how they all think. This is how they operate. I've been living inside the deportation machine for the past 8 years, and brother, it goes burr. Yeah, it's absolutely right. And up the Reds. I mean, first of all, it's kudos to you for building a career, trying to do what you can within that kind of barbaric institution. But again, it goes back to Obama as well. Like Obama, we all heard the complaints from the liberals, especially about the kids in cages and Trump's brutal border system and deportation machine, which Obama himself, enlightened, benevolent, progressive Obama, had built. Trump find it and increased the cruelty even more. ICE as well, yeah, which all escalated under Obama. Trump took those institutions and increased the cruelty even more. And then Biden came in and kept all those same policies in place. Bipartisan.
Initiatives saying they're against Islamophobia, but still unwilling to really aggressively push for a ceasefire. And it almost seems that, you know, in some ways they want to have their cake and eat it too. A lot of these officials is they want to say, well, we care so much now they care so much, you know, about how our constituents are feeling, but they don't also want to address more deeply the causes of what is making this hatred rise to such a high degree. And it almost feels, to me, it just feels like when, for just myself, during the 2020 uprising, when people say, well, you know, we care so much about racism, but then they don't want to seriously address the issue of what the police are doing in our community. It feels like this is kind of a similar issue with how on the one hand, I'll say I'm against Islamophobia, against anti-Arab hate, but then on the same token, you want to say, but I'm actually 100% for this war continuing and this slaughter continuing.
Rob to talk you through all this.
Yeah.
Free Palestine.
Ainsley, thanks so much for 17 months tier 1. Really appreciate that, Ainsley. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry, but 99% Hitler's not a message that's going to get a lot of people to the polls. I don't think so either. Vote for me. The Democrats, we're only 99% Hitler. Like, you know, I don't think that's a winning message either.
It doesn't make sense. And the rollout of the Islamophobia
Pokemon go to the
strategy,
polls?
that's a whole other problem, which, you know, you can have a whole show, you know, dedicated to it, right? We know it was rolled out when the poll numbers started dropping. All of a sudden, you see this program rolled out that's been working on for a year, and then that program within itself even has issues. Is, you know, how is the U.S. government is one of the biggest perpetrators of Islamophobia. So how are they supposed to hold a countering Islamophobia measure when they're engaging in it regularly through their policies and through their implementations of different programs they have? And they're basically absolving themselves of any role by having this a strategy and trying to address it. Well, you have to look internally, and we know how you can get rid of Islamophobia. We know the programs you can remove and the rhetorics you can start changing and putting an end to these wars. And we can go on and on ways that can do that. So we don't see much value in the strategy, and in fact, it may be more, you know, even more harmful to the community than helpful. But yes, the poll numbers start dropping. People now are starting to talk about the elections, but as you know, we've been saying, I've been saying, you know, publicly on my social media channels, it's kind of too late. I mean, 2024 is going to be a brutal year for Democrats. They've underestimated the impact this genocide is going to have on the community. Early on, I was told, you know, directly that your community will forget, your community won't remember. Who are you going to vote for? Trump. You know, look at the alternative. But things like that don't scare the community anymore. You know, threatening with the Muslim ban, threatening with a lot of these policies, they don't have an impact on the community anymore. And it's going to be an interesting year next year.
Fire!
Jesus.
That's the spirit center.
Comfy enough.
You know, I'm curious when we talk about the sort of anti-Arab hate that we're seeing. I mean, I think it's obviously a scale, right? So like on one side, you have the actual violent attacks against people. In this case, the 3 students who were shot in Vermont, the child that was stabbed in Chicago. These are like the very sort of serious sorts of hate crimes that you see get reported on. There's a lot that doesn't get reported on. You know, just to throw out an example, like I have a relative who, like, this isn't a hate crime, but it's just the harassment that people are dealing with. You know, he's like a 13-year-old and he got called a terrorist by some white kids at school because he was trying to add some nuance to the conversation about what's happening in Palestine. So it's like, you know, there's that, you know, all the way to actual violence. So I'm just curious if you could, and then you mentioned firings, people being fired for just expressing support for Palestine. I'm curious if you can maybe break down a bit of the kinds of things that you're hearing that is being reported for the sort of anti-Arab harassment, bigotry, hate, violence that people in the Arab American community are dealing with right now.
Sure, and thank you. That was a good, you know, kind of rundown and explanation that there are things that are not reported, things that don't make the headlines, and this is what we hear, and we hear, you know, these examples daily. You have first on the college campuses the doxing of the students, the silencing of our student groups. You have a lot of students that are being pressured into redacting statements, taking posts down, and most times, you know, the
Let's
students
get ads for war games during my war coverage. Yeah, excuse me. Especially the coverage we've been doing of like how these Israeli tank units have actually been performing. Maybe that's not the best time to advertise your like tank video game when you have stories now coming out about untrained Israeli tank crews blowing up kibbutzes with people inside and stuff like that. Maybe that's not the best crossover in terms of like brand synergy. A kid got suspended because he said free Palestine after being called a terrorist. You know, that's not surprising. It's worthwhile talking about. We've talked about the slogans, you know, from the river to the sea and all that kind of stuff. And now free Palestine is getting the same treatment. It's getting the same treatment. Now it's anti-Semitic and supports terrorism to say free Palestine. In the midst of a mass bombing campaign in which over 16,000 people have been killed. It's truly just off the deep end, totally insane, literally 1984 type stuff. As much as the very people that are promoting this love to talk about Orwell in 1984, this is the most 1984-ass discourse that we could possibly have. Not a boomer take. COD was detrimental for a generation, created so many Islamophobes. I mean, I think that's the amazing thing when we focus on anti-Semitism so strongly. And when we talk about this, no one is ever suggesting that anti-Semitism doesn't exist. Of course it does. Of course it does. But the way that we have this intense focus on anti-Semitism and we conflate support for Palestine as being part of that, you know, it's not that anti-Semitism doesn't exist, but often the examples that are used to talk about anti-Semitism that's happening are simply people saying like free Palestine, or like that incident on the bus that we were looking at earlier. But at the same time, the way that Islamophobia was so, and still remains to be, obviously, from as we see over the last couple of weeks, Islamophobia is such an essential part of our society. Open Islamophobia in our media, in like our pop culture, in our political culture. People built entire media and political careers off open, unapologetic Islamophobia, which, you know, and then we suggest that that's not a serious issue in our society. And then we have to focus on like billion-dollar bookstores owned by people who support the IDF being protested. And we claim that that's the form of racism and discrimination we got to focus on right now. It's absolutely fucking insane.
don't want to deal with the headache, or they don't want to deal with, going through a process. They cave in. But that's been starting to change over the past few weeks. A lot of students are starting to fight back. They're starting to understand their rights, and they're starting to understand they can't be silenced. That's a good thing. The most troubling are the things that are happening in elementary schools and in high schools across the country on a very regular basis. And it's not from other students. Most of the times it's from other teachers. There's a local school district out here in the DC area where, teachers have made clearly anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian comments, but there's no reprimand. They're not held responsible for it. And the administration does anything they can to keep it quiet and, maybe issue an apology directly to the students, but won't address it publicly. Then in the workplace, you have, again, the targeting of employees, the firing of employees, people getting laid off. That is happening, often, or people being threatened, if you don't take this post on, you're going to be fired. It's just continuous. None of these are, they don't rise to the level like, wow, this is such crazy facts. They're all very similar in how they play out because it's very coordinated. It is very sophisticated. There is a game plan for this. It's well funded. It's all tied into, again, silencing us, identifying who we are, identifying who speaks up, going on LinkedIn, emailing their HR bosses or their direct supervisors, and then it just starts going from there. And it is happening daily, and it's going to continue happening.
Well, let me ask you this before we let you go, because we know that people, as you said, are increasingly not allowing themselves to be silent. I know you guys at ADC are right there on the front lines of this. I mean, what are some of the things that people are doing to push back against this rise in hatred, and how can those who want to help intersect with those efforts?
Absolutely. The one thing we're doing, what we're starting to do is we have to be aggressive. We have to go on the offensive. That's why we've made a commitment to, hold those accountable, not, that are perpetrating the hate, not only through criminal charges, but we're going to start pursuing civil actions. We have a number of lawsuits that are lined up. We represent the family of the 6-year-old and the mom of the 6-year-old that was stabbed in Chicago with attorney Ben Crump, and hope to file a civil lawsuit against the person that stabbed him and killed him. We have a number of other civil actions and civil lawsuits lined up because we got to, in this country, you have to send a message. And if we can make people pay, hopefully that's a deterrent in the future. And then those that have been fired are also looking into legal actions. And it's time we get mature, and it's time we organize around taking advantage of, the civil court system we have here, holding people accountable, making them pay for their actions. Even though if they don't face criminal charges, let's at least put them through civil court and have them pay up and have them learn a lesson that they can't act this way and they can't target us this way.
Abed Ayoub, Executive Director of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I chose Wix for my business because of its massive scope for functionality and freedom of creation. Being able to integrate and change and develop at my own pace. I offer a range of products and services. To manage it all from one place is essential. It gave me time back in my day to get going on actual projects. It really just made everything feel more
so many
achievable.
ads. So many ads on YouTube. So many ads on YouTube. Unblocking Firefox. Maybe I got to try switching to Firefox. Because I did put it the new ad blocker, which worked for a time, and then YouTube found me out. They found me out. Yeah, and Wix as well, the Tel Aviv headquarter tech company. Okay, what's next? What's next here? We do have this. There's something on breaking points about that clip from the Secretary of Defense that we saw. Oh, if there's a new VJ video, that could be good, Relic. Do you have the link? My computer shut off because I lost power today, so. You gonna cover Venezuela? I mean, I've been sort of peripherally paying attention to it. I would like to wait until I have a firmer grasp on it before I weigh in too much. I did see that there was this big referendum in Venezuela to talk about that. I don't know. It's the kind of thing, like, there's stuff going on in Congo right now as well that I want to know more about before I start shooting from the hip over it. So I don't say anything stupid. I think this is going to be really valuable. Let's just put this on. I do have about another hour to go. I don't know that I have enough time to watch this video, but we're going to try. Okay, we're going to try. Free Pale. That's me. If you're looking for a pail, I'm right here. It's totally free. If you want me to come to your home and just like keep me there, it's free. A free pail of delicious, refreshing Mountain Dew. With everyone who says from the code word from the river to the sea. You get a little. They send you a bucket. They send you a full bucket.
Thank you for tuning in today and welcome back to another episode of The Source. I'm your host, Zain Raza. And today I'll be talking to author, historian, and journalist Vijay Prashad.
I gotta email
about
VJ.
Israel's
It's
war in
about time
Gaza.
for our annual
Vijay Prashad is the author of more than 30 books,
interview.
Some of them being The Withdrawal, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, and the Fragility of US Power, and Washington Bullets, A History of the CIA, Coups and Assassinations. Vijay Prashad, welcome back.
It's great to be with you. Yeah, thanks.
Let us start with the recent events taking place in Israel and Gaza by recapping the current situation. On October 7th, after Hamas launched a terrorist attack against Israel and killed at least 1,200 civilians, many of whom were military personnel, Israel declared war on Gaza, starting with an aerial bombardment operation and following it with a ground invasion. In Gaza, according to the Health Ministry and UN reports, more than 14,532 Palestinians have killed, and that include more than 5,000 children. Gaza's health officials say they have lost the ability to account for the dead due to Israel's ongoing military operation. It is also being reported that more civilians have died in Israel's assault in Gaza in just 55 days than in the entirety of Russia's war in Ukraine, dating back to February 2022. How do you assess the situation so far, in particular Hamas's attack on October 7 and Israel's response thereafter?
Well, the first thing is to quote from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, a lot of media are starting the story with the Hamas and other faction attacks.
They broke the ceasefire
across the line from Gaza. But October 7th doesn't start the problem. The problem begins in the occupation of the Palestinians, which begins in 1948. But even more specifically, in a way, Gaza is a very narrow strip on the Mediterranean Sea and hemmed in mostly by Israel. Israel controls the Gaza Strip. Palestinian children born in Gaza have to be registered with the Israeli government. They get an Israeli registration number. Recently, Elon Musk said he would like to provide Starlink internet for Gaza, saying that the internet has been cut, relief agencies can't function, we should provide umbrella internet. And the Israeli government said, no, we will be regulating your provision of internet for these agencies. In other words, these two examples of the identity card and of the fact of the internet situation, it just shows you how Gaza is under occupation. There is no sovereignty for the Palestinians of Gaza. Yes, Israel pulled out troops in 2005. That's true. Even uprooted settlements in 2005, but Israel maintains a embargo, siege of Gaza controls the land and even controls the population, demanding that they have their identities registered with the Israelis. It's part of what the UN calls the Occupied Palestinian Territory, the OPT. That's an official UN designation. So Gaza has been hemmed in. There was an election in the Palestinian territories, the occupied Palestinian territories, and the people of Gaza voted for Hamas. This was in 2006. Now, neither the Israelis nor the Americans wanted to permit Hamas to govern Gaza. Hamas was prepared to come into a political, compact where they would run the municipalities, where they would deal with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and so on. They were prepared, but the West and Israelis said, no, we cannot allow Hamas to enter the political process. This is what the Israeli political science Baruch Kimmerling calls politicide. Not genocide, but politicide, killing the ability of a people to have a politics. Then every time the people inside Gaza try to assert themselves, demand rights and so on, the Israelis pummeled them with violence. 2008, 2009, Operation Cast Lead. Almost every year after that, 2014, brutal
Mowing the grass.
attack, Operation Permanent Resolve. I mean, you travel to Gaza after Operation Permanent Resolve, walking down the streets of Khan Yunis, walking down the streets of Gaza City, the entire neighborhoods were flattened. I was surprised to see the level of destruction after 2014. Gaza has been in this condition of not allowed to have any kind of reasonable politics. Then in 2019, the people of Gaza organized a non-violent march to the perimeter fence called the March of Return. And instead of saying, okay, now they are operating non-violently, let's have a negotiation. No, Israeli snipers fired at unarmed protesters marching to the fence and killed over 200 people. Where was the outrage then? What about 2019? Why doesn't history start there? Why only October 7th?
Where's
what
the
about
ceasefire?
2014? Why doesn't history start there? What about 2008, 2009? Why doesn't history start there and go back to 1948? So the people of Gaza
we've
have
seen this,
all
like,
kinds
really, history is a weapon. It's a cliche, but we've seen with this and with Ukraine especially, this very cynical deployment of history and this very cynical refusal to learn from or think about or analyze anything that happened before a specific date. The history begins on a certain date, and when we decide, according to our liberal ruling class, when we decide when it starts. And anything before that, any context, anything that we might learn from the situation prior to that, it's just completely jettisoned. Even if our own media, in Ukraine especially, was talking about Ukraine and talking about these fascist militias in Ukraine, even if they were themselves talking about this narrative, or the bombing in these eastern regions, which was being covered in CNN and these mainstream media outlets, the same people. As soon as February 2022 happens, gone. All that context just totally gone. It's been honestly shocking and bizarre for me to witness the way people are able to just completely forget or just completely ignore any of this kind of context, even if they once talked about it themselves. I mean, it's like the meme of like the switch flipping in their head. Like, I don't think when right-wingers say that kind of thing, they're just as guilty of that, or maybe even more guilty of that. So I don't like these people or think we have anything to learn from them, but it really is like that though. This switch flips. Our masters in the media and in politics start telling us a certain story, and even people that know better are just like, bloop, and they just completely forget about it. It's really incredible, actually. I mean, that's why dialectical and historical materialism is such a valuable skill. Not only media literacy, like we're talking about in the chat, not even media literacy and understanding the way that the media lies to us and manipulates us and tries to manufacture consent, all that stuff, but having this historical and materialist perspective and analysis. It makes it totally impossible to be swept away when they turn on the propaganda machine, because we know better, and that's why we're not taught these skills. We're not taught about that. We're not taught about media literacy. So it makes it easier for the people that control this propaganda machine to manipulate us. And fewer people are allowing that to happen. We talked about the ways that social media has reinforced this. This is why they're freaking out about TikTok. They think that's the reason. That's the reason that the younger generation is against the mass murder of children. You know? Must be because of TikTok. Because, you know, the imperialists, the Zionists, they need to control that narrative. They need to have full control over the narrative in order to manipulate people. And that's one thing that they don't really have anymore. That's why it's not working anymore.
Politics, electoral politics, 2006 elections. Hamas won the elections. They were told, sorry, we don't like you, so you can't take office. I mean, that's the nature of Western, democracy for other people. And then 2019, we're going to march to the fence non-violently. They're going to use snipers and kill 200 of you. So, now you say, well, why did Hamas use this violent technique on October 7th? Well, they tried elections, you shut them down. Then they tried a non-violent march, you shut them down. In fact, you killed over 200 people with snipers. So they took action like this. Frantz Fanon in Wretched of the Earth makes a very interesting point about colonized people. Fanon says that the violence of the colonized person is merely a mirror reflection of the violence of the colonizer. So in that sense, Israel has created a structure of violence around the occupation of the Palestinians. Why is it a surprise that the Palestinians then react violently, despite the fact that they also tried electoralism, they also tried nonviolence? You keep squeezing them violently, they will respond with violence. That's the nature of political struggle in a colonial context, which is exactly what this is. So yes, of course, nobody wants to see civilians killed, Zen, nobody. Nobody wants to see children killed and so on. That is an outrageous thing. On the other hand, it's not something that you can just say, this is the problem of Hamas. Why don't you condemn Hamas and so on? Hamas is a mirror reflection in that sense of the colonial conditions placed by the Israelis. I mean,
yeah, I love that mirror metaphor as well. It's really helpful. It's really helpful to understand, as we've seen time and time again. And it's the same thing. I got hundreds of people right now on Twitter yelling at me because I called out this narrative of the roving rape gangs and the way that that's being employed very cynically to justify and whitewash the violence that we're seeing, and also that that's part of the colonialism playbook. But that is an exact example of that, of every accusation being a confession. We've seen that time and time again throughout the last 6 weeks with the dead babies, the murdered babies, sexual violence against women, which, as we've talked about, has a long and documented history against Palestinian women in Israeli prisons and in other situations. Always a confession. And it's not even about Israel as well. We see the same thing when our government wields these accusations about human rights against other countries as well. It's always a confession as well. It's always things that we ourselves have done or are currently doing, often at a much greater scale, all these accusations. So this is just it's not purely a feature of Israel. I think Israel is ultimately an example of that kind of colonialism tactics and mindset. So that's why it's a really extreme example of that. But everywhere that colonialism exists, you have that kind of framework. And the way that these accusations are hurled around to justify the occupation, the apartheid, the exploitation, the dehumanization. And it's always a confession. Like I don't know, I've lost track of all the times on the show that we've talked about this exact subject. It just comes up time and time and time again.
I mean, it's also the case, and I'll close with this, that over this period,
yeah, you learn who's the oppressor and oppressed by who's allowed violence, the monopoly on violence. We talk about that
the
often
Popular
too,
Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Khalid al-Jarrad, for instance, the leaders of these movements are all sitting in Israeli prisons. Israel has basically defanged the ability of the left to operate because they kill left-wing leaders and they imprison them. They don't allow them to produce, but they allow Hamas to operate. And so then Hamas becomes the face of the Palestinian resistance. It's not that Hamas is the only game in town. There are other factions and so on. But this is also part of Israel's ploy to canalize, dissent into the route of Hamas and to try to neuter the left forces within the Palestinian struggle by jailing their leadership and so on. So what I'm just trying to play here is not to, evade the question of October 7th. If you were a different kind of interviewer, you would say, but do you condemn Hamas? That's not the kind of interviewer you are. And in fact, me condemning Hamas is hardly going to change anything. The real issue is to try to understand why October 7th happened. My condemnation is of no consequence, but I'm giving an explanation of why October 7th was so stark. What the Israelis are calling Israel September 11th. Why is that so stark? It's so stark because Hamas's operation, in some ways, was a mirror of the structure of colonial violence put in place. And in fact, it's a mirror of the fact that the Israelis have prevented any other kind of politics available for the Palestinian people.
I want to look at another recent issue. On October 7th, Hamas and the Islamic Jihad took 239 hostages that included foreign nationals, soldiers, and civilians. After initially rejecting the ceasefire for hostage deal, the Israeli government, after facing mounting domestic pressure, came to an agreement with Hamas, which includes the release of Israeli hostages for a temporary ceasefire, allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza, and the release of Palestinian women and children from Israeli prisons. Today, Israel holds around 8,000 Palestinians in its prisons. While the Western media is focusing on the release of Israeli hostages and there's emotional aspect around it, and rightfully so, little to no attention is being paid to the release of Palestinians. Who are these Palestinians being held by Israel? And can they even be called prisoners, as the Western media keeps on repeating?
Okay, so this is a really interesting and important issue here. Yes, there are 8,000 at a minimum Palestinians imprisoned in Israeli jails, many of them under laws that, if scrutinized properly, would horrify liberals. These are the administrative detention orders. Look, there is something called corpus delicti, where you cannot be convicted of a crime unless the fact of the crime having taken place is proved. In other words, if there's no evidence of a murder, you can't convict me of murder. There has to be a body. There has to be, some evidence. You can't just say, you are a murderer, I'm convicting you. You understand? It's called corpus delicti. It's a very old established part of European legal tradition. Unless you can prove a crime has taken place, you can't condemn or convict somebody of that crime because there was no evidence of the crime. It's a hallucination. Many of the people sitting in Israeli prisons, political prisoners, are convicted of crimes for which there is no evidence that the crime occurred. For instance, they are convicted of terrorism, administrative detention for terrorism. What did they do?
Oh, we found a knife.
They belong to a political party.
They belong to a political party. We arrested a little kid and then we found a knife. We happened to find a knife a few feet away. Well, they were planning to stab an IDF soldier then,
Where is you see, Israel hasn't proved that membership in that political party, let's say Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, they named the party a terrorist group, okay? But again, it's not a crime to be in a political party. In fact, United Nations treaty obligations, the UN Charter allows for political association. You are allowed to gather together for under a political platform. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine is a political party. And also under Oslo, the Oslo Accords of 1994, it has legal standing. And yet, a lot of people are picked up as members or leaders of political parties. They're accused of things which didn't happen. There is no corpus delicti. That's the one interesting issue. In that sense, it's quite interesting that Palestinian leaders say, these are not prisoners, these are also hostages. They are held hostage there. They are held politically hostage. What is a political prisoner if not a political hostage? They are held incommunicado. They are not able to have a relationship with their political allies, with the forces out there, and so on. This is what, again, Baruch Kimmerling called politicide. You're killing the politics of a people. That itself is a violation of international treaties. So they are held hostage. Okay. Among their ranks, among the 8,000 odd prisoners, are very large numbers of children. I mean, Samidun, the prisoner network, Palestinian Defense for Children, and so on, they give a whole series of numbers of how many children, 1,000, 1,800, there are numbers out there. The fact is, Zain, if one child is in prison where there is no corpus delicti, you can't prove the crime has been committed. To me, that is ridiculous. That itself is such an enormous violation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and so on, that somebody should be in a jail cell for putting children in prison. Let's back up for a minute, okay? During the war in Ukraine, the early period of the war, the International Criminal Court put forward arrest warrants from the International Criminal Court against the basis given by the Rome Statute, the Treaty of Rome 2002, 2 arrest warrants, one for Mr. Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, and secondly for a person who works in his cabinet, in his administration. They were charged with removing 6,000 children from an active war zone to Russia. They didn't kill them. They didn't imprison them. They moved 6,000 children from a war zone. Now, one can have a debate. Is that a war crime? Maybe it is. Transport of population and so on. You could have a debate and a discussion. Israel has killed 6,000 children in Gaza and has maybe 1,000+ plus children as hostages in prisons. Nobody has shaped an international criminal court warrant against Mr. Netanyahu or people like that. There's no international outrage that children are sitting in Israeli prisons, often condemned of the following crimes: throwing a rock at a
it's worth mentioning those ICC war crime charges against Putin. That's what it's related to. Moving children out of a war zone. And like BJ saying, maybe you can consider that a war crime. Like you can have that debate. You can have that discussion. But it's really amazing, the idea that someone can be accused of war crimes by these large international, supposedly like objective institutions for moving children out of a war zone, but the same accusations don't get thrown around when a government openly, in full view of the whole world, and unapologetically murders, not relocates, murders 6,000 children, to say nothing of the children that have been put in Israeli prisons. Like, this is only 6,000 children in the last 6 weeks. Like, it just speaks to how completely useless these international institutions are that are supposed to be objective and supposed to be ways to hold powerful people to account, no matter who they are. It shows how completely worthless they are and how they're ultimately just become arms of Western imperialism.
Settler throwing a rock at an illegal Israeli military outpost in the West Bank that's protecting settlements. The settlement is illegal by international law. The military outpost is doubly illegal by international law. A child throws a rock at these, the child is in jail. The children are in jail for yelling at Israeli soldiers when they come and raid their villages. Children are put in jail when they write on social media against the Israeli occupation and so on. These are political crimes. These are not even crimes. These are political acts, but they're criminalized, you see. And then you have these children as hostages. No international condemnation, no international worry, no ICC warrant for Mr. Netanyahu. So yes, there is a kind of invisibility going on about the treatment of Palestinian children in the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, of course, nobody wants a child to be taken as a hostage. Hamas should not have taken children as hostages. That is outrageous, you know. But then I don't know what the alternative is at that moment. You're going to take the parents hostages, leave the children there. I don't know what happened inside those kibbutz. I don't know exactly what went on. There's a lot of controversy about what happened on October 7th.
He's very good at talking about
when
this
these
kind of
fighters
stuff.
entered the kibbutzim. There's some evidence now that some of the people were not killed by Hamas and Islamic Jihad, but by the Israeli forces trying to take back the kibbutz. Those numbers might be slightly more complicated. We don't really know. There's a huge fog here because independent journalists cannot operate inside Israel. But it is outrageous to take children. You know, it's outrageous in any, but it's so asymmetrical, the coverage, as you say. You know, those photographs that are coming of Palestinians coming home, those are busloads of children. Busloads of children.
Who've been in prison for 7 years in some cases.
Why was Israel holding these children?
Not 45 days.
That's the prior
6, 7, 8
Not
years.
that the children are being released. Of course, that's important. Should be celebrated. Children should be reunited with their families. Now, deeply damaged by being in prison, again, for conducting political acts. In some cases, and there are 1 or 2 cases that Betsalem had written about, where children were picked up because they walked down the wrong road. You know that in the West Bank, there are roads for Israeli Jews, and then there are roads for Palestinians. If the Palestinians go on the Israeli Jewish road, they can be arrested. And that's sometimes what has happened. Imagine that, segregated roads. What better example do you need of apartheid?
Yeah, that's apartheid.
You began the interview by providing context on the Palestinian struggle, but I would like to focus on the Palestinian struggle that took place on the international level and how the West played a vital role in undermining it. Could you provide us some context on the international diplomatic level where Palestinians attempted to resolve the issue via peaceful means?
It's interesting because, you know, the state of Israel is created in 1948 at the time when they ethnically cleansed large parts of that land in the Nakba, the great catastrophe, a term used by the Lebanese historian Constantine Zorai. It captures everything, the catastrophe, you know. At that time, international support for the Palestinians was very much restricted to the new United Nations. The new United Nations, some of the newly emerging states out of colonialism, you know, countries like India, Pakistan, and so on, which were now newly independent, provided some diplomatic support for the Palestinian cause. But it was extremely weak. The main support came from the Arab states, both militarily, the attack on the newly formed state of Israel by the forces of Egypt Jordan, and Syria. That was the immediate response. The Arab states defending the Palestinians. For years, it was basically the Arab states that held the cause of the Palestinians. Very cleverly, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, led by Yasser Arafat in the 1960s, started a campaign, a global campaign, to link the Palestinian cause with the cause of the Vietnamese. Very clever move, because international solidarity.
Time check. I don't think we're going to make it through.
Vietnam against the French.
We'll have to do part 2 tomorrow.
And then the United States was immense. There were, you in Germany, the German Democratic Republic, the DDR, had made the cause of the Vietnamese very much central to its internationalism. In Cuba after 1959, the cause of the Vietnamese central. I'm talking to you from Santiago, Chile, where Victor Jara, the great singer, part of the popular unity movement, writes a song, El Derecho, which is about Ho Chi Minh. I mean, solidarity with the Vietnamese was right on top of the table. And what the Palestinians do that's clever is they yoke
Cuban solidarity with the Angolans as well.
The struggle of the Vietnamese, anti-imperialist struggle, and so on. And then there were some spectacular instances of their attempt at raising consciousness, such as the hijacking of planes. The figure of Laila Khalid plays a major role as a hijacker of planes, taking them to the Libyan desert, removing all the passengers.
So knowledgeable and articulate in his analysis. I mean, it just shows how history, as much as history is a weapon that can be used against us, we can also wield it ourselves when we have a real understanding of the history. And the more of a comprehensive understanding of the history you have, the easier it is to analyze these kinds of situations and talk about it. And VJ is a really great example of that, I think.
To send a message saying that Palestine must not be forgotten. It is being, the Nakba is a permanent condition, and so on. And so for years, the Palestinian struggle becomes part of, in a way, left struggles around the world. Left movements all, had a common agenda in trying to keep the Palestinian struggle visible. Now, this, of course, had an impact in the last 30, 40 years in particular, as Israeli violence became very much something that was visible. You can't hide it, you can't hide the nature of the violence, the bombings of Gaza periodically, the treatment of people in the West Bank, apartheid roads, an apartheid wall, and so on. That a sentiment began to grow in the last 40 odd years, saying that the Palestinians should not be treated like this, that even Bethlehem, the site of the Christian, worship, birthplace of Jesus Christ, and so on. Bethlehem is garrisoned. Every year in Christmas, there's an image that gets circulated of Joseph and Mary and trying to enter Bethlehem with their donkey so that Mary can go and give birth to Jesus. But there are barbed wire and walls, and they can't get in. Every year in Christmas, that image circulates. Many different images with the same theme circulate every year. Now, Israel, therefore, created these, actually cabinet-level positions on public diplomacy, hasbara, to tell Israel's story, to confront, raised enormous amounts of money from overseas supporters, including the Christian right wing, who are anti-Semitic to the core. Pastor John Hagee in the United States is anti-Semite to the core, but he's pro-Israel. Why are these evangelicals such supporters of Israel, even though they have an extremely anti-Semitic approach? Because they believe that Jews must take over Jerusalem, build the second temple, and then God will kill all the Jews, and then Christians will rise to heaven. I mean, it's a deeply anti-Semitic vision, and yet they are the principal supporters of Israel. So people like that, important figures overseas, raised a lot of money for this Hasbara campaign, the attempt. And part of this Hasbara campaign, Zain, and this is interesting for Germany, part of this Hasbara campaign was to portray any critic of Israel, any critic, not just a critic of Zionism, but any critic, liberal critics of Israel, as anti-Semites. That became very much part of the process. You saw what happened at Documenta and Kassel. You don't like a criticism of Israel, call the artist an anti-Semite. And secondly, to cancel them. So Roger Waters coming to Germany to play in Munich, to play in different places in Frankfurt. In fact, the venue cancels the concert, and Roger Waters had to sue the venue to allow him to play. In Buenos Aires, Roger Waters couldn't get a hotel room for himself in the whole city of Buenos Aires because hoteliers said, we will not allow him to, we'll cancel it. So Hasbara, desperate to close down the story about Israel's apartheid, Israel's occupation, treatment of Palestine, and so on, attempted with a lot of...
I'm yelling at some guy who DM'd me. Some random guy DM'd me because I have a tweet that has escaped containment on this. So I have random people now DMing me and messaging me. I was just taking a moment to yell at that guy.
Money, building institutions that portrayed all critics of Israel, all critics of Zionism as anti-Semites and then to cancel them. And if you cancel one or two people, or Roger Waters, say somebody prominent, etc., you fire an academic. When I was a professor, I would get routine harassment saying he is an anti-Semite. Why? Because he is a critic of Israel. He writes about Israel's wars. He's a pro-Palestinian. That makes him anti-Semitic. Furthest from the thing, I'm a complete anti-racist, completely against anti-Semitism. The real anti-Semites are seen as allies of Israel. It's a bizarre situation, Zain, extremely bizarre.
Yes, it is.
Germany can't have a decent conversation about Israel. People are too nervous and scared. And partly because they haven't gotten over the fact of the Holocaust. They haven't been able to come to terms with Germany's role in the creation of Israel. Germany plays a role in the creation of Israel. Had there not been a Holocaust, there might not be a state of Israel. We may not be here.
Israel should just exist and just build it in Germany.
And Poland and these countries were not so deeply
problem solved.
Troubled by the so-called
Germany supports Zionism so much. Just move Israel to Germany.
19th century racist debate inside
I just fix
the German
problem.
world or the Polish world or whatever, France, all these countries. Anti-Semitism is a European problem. But the Hasbara project tried to project anti-Semitism out of its European roots and into the domain of saying this is about critics of Israel. But here's the interesting thing. This bombardment from October 7th onwards, 14,000 plus people killed, 6,000 plus children killed, 1.7 Palestinians displaced from their homes in northern Gaza. The visuals of the bombardment, the attacks on hospitals, entire generation has been created now of people who will not buy what the Hasbara communities are selling, this propaganda of the Israelis. They will not take it. An entire generation. I mean, the government of Israel, I think at some level knows they have lost the world. Now it's just the United States that's holding firm. And interesting, the Israelis now want to shift the focus to go south.
Germany does not have a right to exist.
Of Saladin Street, which divides northern and southern Gaza, south of Khan Yunis. They want to take a fight where they have told people to go and become, as it were, refugees, And it's the US that's saying, please don't do that. Please don't bomb southern Gaza like you bombed the north. But the Israelis are going to do it. And Zain, then you're not only going to lose the generation for X number of years, you're never going to be able to win them back.
On November 14, Finance Minister of Israel, Bezalel Smotrich, stated, and I quote him here, quote, "I welcome the initiative of the voluntary immigration of Gaza Arabs to countries around the world. This is the right humanitarian solution for the residents of Gaza and the entire region after 75 years of refugees, poverty, and danger. The State of Israel will no longer be able to accept the existence of an independent entity in Gaza," unquote. Given this statement, and you already mentioned south of Gaza, what do you think Israel's goal is after eliminating every last soldier of Hamas? Or do you think there are other objectives in mind here? And where will the 2.2 million refugees go?
Yeah, this is a very important and interesting discussion. Okay, so first point here is that, remember I said there was a Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of 1948, when Palestinians from within what becomes Israel are either removed out into the what later becomes occupied Palestinian territory, East Jerusalem, West Bank, and Gaza, or they are thrown out into Jordan, into Egypt, into Lebanon, and further afield, becoming refugees. Some stay put into refugee camps run by the United Nations. Okay, that's the Nakba. In a sense, the Nakba never ended. There has been since 1948 a permanent Nakba. Israeli state policy since 1948 was to make the life of Palestinians so miserable that they will flee out, go to Australia, go to United States, go to Chile. Chile has the largest population of Palestinians outside the Middle East. Basically, the attempt by the Israeli government since 1948 was to take the Nakba to the final stage. In fact, now Israeli officials are talking about a second Nakba, as if there hasn't been a permanent Nakba since 1948. Okay, so that's been the state policy. In 1994, the Israeli government disingenuously made an agreement with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, an agreement called the Oslo Accords. This idea was that in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza, they'll create a Palestinian state. That will be the two-state solution. One state of Israel and one state of Palestine. And the idea was, because these are non-contiguous spaces, Palestinians would have safe passage between them. They can go from Gaza to the West Bank and East Jerusalem and vice versa. That there would be, in fact, no interference by the Israelis of these zones and so on. There were a number of provisions placed in there. And in fact, built into the cake of the Oslo Accords was the failure of the two-state solution. What do I mean? Number one, the very day they signed the Oslo Accords, the Israelis annulled safe passage. They didn't allow Palestinians to move between these three parts of the occupied Palestinian territory. Gaza was, kept separate from the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So safe passage was annulled. So they already violated the two-state agreement called Oslo Accords. Secondly, the Israelis from the beginning started to build settlements inside the West Bank and inside Gaza at the time, building large settlements, building settlement roads, started to build an apartheid wall around. I use the word apartheid wall. It's not my definition. It's not a moral statement. It's a legal issue. The International Court of Justice called it an apartheid wall. Build that around the West Bank to garrison in the people, to prevent against safe passage. You had to stand in long lines to try to get from one part of Palestine into the next, and so on. The settlements ate into the West Bank, ate into Gaza. Water sources were taken over by the Israeli settlers. These settlements are illegal. Again, international treaties have demonstrated that you can't go in and take land from people you're occupying. Also, international courts have said repeatedly, and so has the United Nations. So has the United Nations at the highest level said that these settlements are illegal. So they eroded the two-state solution through that. And East Jerusalem, one of the three parts of the occupied Palestinian territory, has almost entirely been taken over by the Israelis, with their quest to build Jerusalem as the capital. So they have always rejected this. The idea of the two-state solution, which was there from 1994, was always a mirage. It was not taken seriously by the Israelis. They continued their long-term policy of the permanent Nakba, make life so miserable for the Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, that they will leave. And so the Israelis have always had it in their head to make a three-state solution. The three states being Egypt, Lebanon, and Jordan. That's where they want the Palestinians to go. That's their three-state solution. And that's what they've been saying in this last period. The only humanitarian solution is for Palestinians to leave the territory. I mean, that is a war crime. That's not a humanitarian. Don't make a war crime into a humanitarian solution. That itself is deeply troubling, that they are using the language of humanitarianism in a way to camouflage what is basically a war crime.
One of the prevailing arguments in Germany is that, look, nobody wants the Palestinians, including Islamic nations like Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and so forth. And although they support them on the streets and loudly, very vocally, diplomatically, look, nobody really wants them. What do you think this line of thought reveals?
I mean, this is actually very mendacious. This is a mischievous argument, because let's face some facts. Firstly, there is a large the Palestinian population in Jordan is a majority of the population of Jordan. Okay, so lots of Palestinians are in Jordan. There's a large Palestinian population in Syria. In Damascus, if you travel to Damascus, in the area called Yarmouk, it's a majority Palestinian area. In Lebanon, there are large areas, including the Israelis well know, the camp of Sabra Shatila, where they helped conduct a massacre in 1982, then the camps in Saida in the south, and so on. There are large numbers of Palestinians in Lebanon. In Egypt, there is a large Palestinian population. Across the Gulf, there are sizable Palestinian populations. Firstly, the Gulf is very much underpopulated area, but sizable Palestinian, in Kuwait, for instance, big Palestinian population. That's where Yasser Arafat and his friends formed Al-Fatah, which becomes the pillar of the Palestinian Liberation Organization that was created in Kuwait, where they were students of engineering and medicine and so on. So it's actually disingenuous to say they don't want the Palestinians. Secondly, Palestinians do not want to go and become Egyptian or to become Jordanian. They want to be Palestinian. They have a right to be Palestinian. UN Resolution 194, it's a UN resolution, it's a treaty obligation, calls for the right of return of Palestinians to their homeland. They have a right. They don't want. I have friends who are sitting near the Rafah crossing, worried about their children, worried about the bombing and so on. But they are equally worried that if they cross into Egypt, they will never be allowed to go back to their homes in Gaza City, that they will lose the right to return. 194 UN resolution, the right to return. The Israelis are trying to push the Palestinians out, even saying things like later you can come back. But what do you mean later you can come back? After the Nakba, 1948, there was a UN resolution giving Palestinians a right to return. It never allowed them to return, not till today. Why should any Palestinian believe the statement that go out for humanitarian reasons, then you can come back? They will never be allowed in. So for people to say, hey, look, the Arab countries don't want, the Palestinians don't want to go to Egypt. They don't want to become Lebanese. They want to be Palestinian. For God's sake, they have a right to their homeland. And to say that, is so disingenuous. I mean, and this coming from countries like Germany, which are so reticent to absorb migrants. I mean, Germany has its own problem with migration, where you have the rise of a right wing, which is deeply anti-immigrant. The levels of racism against, say, people who come from Turkey or northern Africa and so on, deep levels of racism. One hears about, Muslim residents in Germany facing deep discrimination. Disingenuousness of somebody in a country like Germany to say, well, look, the Arab countries don't want the Palestinians. You don't want migrants. From what moral standard are you judging any country?
I want to look at some regional players surrounding this conflict and look.
I think that's a good place to leave it. We made it halfway through this video. I'm going to go ahead and link it in the chat. Please make sure you check that out. As always, insightful, clear-headed, and powerful analysis from VJ. Like I said, when history is a weapon, can be used against us, but we can use it ourselves. And when we have that kind of a grasp on the history, not just the history in Israel-Palestine, but the history of colonialism, we can analyze these things and we can break it down, and we can understand it, and we don't get confused by these pathetic propaganda narratives like what we've seen over the last couple of days. I'll try to get to the rest of that video tomorrow. That was really good stuff. And again, I got to reach out to VJ to get him on for his annual appearance on this program. Folks, thank you very much for watching the program today and tuning in and supporting this show and supporting the work that I do on here. I really do appreciate it a whole lot. I'll go ahead and let's raid Dan Simpson. Dan Simpson had a really funny interaction with Ben Dreyfus, which I lost brain cells even looking at, but very funny. I love Ben Dreyfus is like, I love living in the West. I love living in America. It's like, yeah, well, it's probably pretty nice actually to be the son of a multi-millionaire Hollywood celebrity. I imagine you've had a pretty good time. Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, when you're a nepotism baby with your head up your ass, you can't actually see that people in our society, especially people from other cultures, immigrants, do not have the same experience. We're not actually, because you're not the protagonist of reality. Not everyone else around you is the spawn of a multimillionaire Hollywood celebrity. So I don't doubt that, my life has been pretty great actually. In growing up in Canada, as a white, affluent person in Canada, my life has been pretty great. But I think one thing you have to realize eventually is that what your experience doesn't necessarily reflect on everybody's experience. And in fact, just because you yourself have personally benefited from a certain situation doesn't mean that system is, or that country or that ideology is good or has value. It just means that you were lucky enough to win the genetic lottery where you benefited from it rather than being exploited by it. This is the really big brain ideas that Ben Dreyfus doesn't have. See you tomorrow, folks.